What was your big, oh no moment in a surgery? I was doing a corneal transplant when I had the oh crap moment. During surgery, I cut off the patient's own cornea and replaced it with a new donor cornea. During that moment when the host's cornea was off, but before I could get the new one on, there's literally nothing on the front of the eye except a tear film and aqueous humor. Anyway, the patient takes that moment to start emptying their stomach orally. The reason we tell everyone to skip food and drink is so that they don't aspirate in case they throw up. This patient lied about eating breakfast and started just chucking it up everywhere. The eye is still open sky at this time. Everything inside of the eye can now become outside of the eye. And she's buckling and blowing chunks everywhere. Those in the know will say this is not good. Those really in the know will say, oh crap. Anyway, I had to grab the new cornea and start stitching as fast as I could on a patient actively chucking up. I used 10-0 nylon sutures which are thinner than an eyelash. It turned out okay, but not great. Don't lie about eating breakfast before surgery, folks. I work in the operating room and I've seen some pretty interesting things. First day on the job, the surgeon was doing a lap sleeve gastrectomy. During this procedure, a medical device is used to cut and staple the stomach simultaneously. However, in this case, the medical device failed. The stomach was cut open, but the staples never engaged, which left the patient with an enormous gash in the stomach. The surgeon ended up finishing this part by hand. There was also the time I got called into the room to ensure the laparoscopic camera was working and able to record. This was a 6-hour cardiac procedure and was nearing the end, so I knew I was about to see something good. The surgeon pulls out some kind of growth from the inside of the guy's heart. This thing was the size of a chicken wing. It was growing through his valve and I'm honestly amazed they were alive. Supposedly, the only symptoms were shortness of breath. During a C-section for this poor mum who had been in labor for hours, baby would not come out of the hole we had made, so more pressure was applied to the fundus, which is the top of the uterus. Suddenly, whoosh, baby zooms out like a torpedo, covered in lubricating vernix, zips over the surgical sheeting, which has the texture of a slip and slide, and almost rockets straight off the table. The baby's foot was caught by the reg, who whipped her up in the air upside down like in old cartoons, but almost dropped her again due to the gloves and vernix. Thankfully, the midwife was ready with the towel and caught the baby to wrap her up. Mum and Dad seemed to think this was normal practice and didn't notice, but me and my colleague just stared at each other with a look of absolute horror. It still makes me shudder to think how close that baby was to hitting the deck head first. Never happened before or since. Well, just reading that took a couple of minutes off my life, I reckon. I didn't realize that women could fire off their offspring like missiles under the right circumstances. Is this more or less exclusive to C-section births, or can it happen during natural birth as well? When I was a new RN working the ICU in a large teaching hospital, I came into work one morning to a patient that was admitted during the night, intubated, like with a breathing tube in, and sedated, with a Foley catheter, a tube in their wee-wee hole, and everything like that. Long story short, we took the breathing tube out, called extubating, that same shift, and he was completely alert and oriented. He was an end-stage renal patient, meaning his kidneys didn't work and he needed dialysis, and was only in his late 30s. Said he never made urine anymore and didn't need the Foley catheter, so he wanted it out because it was hurting. Now, the catheter bag had been empty my whole shift, which is normal, seeing as how he didn't make urine anymore. And this hospital had a nurse-driven Foley removal policy, meaning while we needed a doctor's order to insert one, we could remove one at our discretion, unless a doctor specifically put in orders not to. This patient had no such doctor's order, so I went to remove the catheter. They're held in the bladder by a balloon on the end of it that's inflated with 10 milliliters of saline. I de-inflated the balloon, removing 10 milliliters of saline and pulled it out. As soon as the catheter left his member, blood started pouring out in heavy streams. Turns out the nurse who placed it on admission hadn't advanced it far enough since there was no urine production to indicate correct placement, and then had inflated the balloon while still in his urethra, causing trauma. It wouldn't stop bleeding. I had to hold this man's eggplant shut to put pressure on it, while my coworker paged the resident who came and looked at me with pity as he told me to just keep holding this 30-something-year-old man's Johnson in my hands to staunch the blood flow until urology could get there to assess. It just kept gushing blood every time I eased up to check. For over an hour total, I held this man's grass snake and tried to make polite conversation until the urologist arrived. When I was younger, I had a rather complex external fixator, like a cage, applied to my leg. It had 3 rings, 2 large 360-degree rings around my leg, one in the upper middle of the shin, one on the lower, which had humongous rods to keep the cage fixed to my leg, and then a third one which was a horseshoe ring kind of thing around my ankle, which threaded all sorts of pins through my ankle, each pin set in a certain way. The point of this external fixator was to relocate and fix the positioning of my ankle so it wouldn't be so screwed, basically. I have a birth defect of clubfoot. A lot of bone got removed before the fixator was put on, so this way it could all grow. It was a 9-hour surgery, and my doctor, who I won't name, was pretty chuffed with himself after seeing it was all installed on my leg. That was until he looked closer. Those pins I spoke about before, with the numbers on them, almost like those sizing things on cheap coat hangers, were all colored and numbered, set for my dad to do every morning and night. He was looking at the pins and the numbers. He glanced away and looked back with a stressed face on. After a few seconds and a slight hand-on-head gesture, he whispered, "Crap." In his mind, he'd organized the pins in an incorrect way. He was stressed beyond his mind for a few minutes. He was worried he'd screwed everything up. Luckily, he hadn't. He just needed to move 1 or 2 numbers. 1 year later, 8 months after the frame was taken off, which was in for about 6 months, I ended up having my leg amputated. The surgery didn't work how we wanted it to, or at least how I wanted it to, which we were sort of expecting. The goal was to get me walking. The amputation got me running. Bear in mind, the amputation was my call. I was 12 when it was done. Best decision I ever made. 5th-year resident here. There are lots of bad "oh crap" moments throughout training, such as necrotizing soft tissue infections or takebacks for bad complications, or deaths during cases. However, I'd like to share a recent positive "oh crap" moment. 15-centimeter kidney tumor with thrombus into the vena cava. Big incision, great exposure of the vasculature and the tumor. My attending and I are dancing around the aorta and vena cava. We're able to feel the tumor thrombus in the IVC. I was expecting that we'd need to cut and clamp the vena cava to get all the cancer out, but my attending literally squeezes the tumor out of the vena cava back into the renal vein and then has me tie the renal vein off so the tumor doesn't slip back into the vena cava. The patient went home in like 4 days. Margins were negative and they're still doing great. First time I felt like, oh crap, I'm a surgeon. Surgeon here. I've dealt with loads of morbid stuff, but one thing that made me stop and go, "oh no," was a conversation with a young patient who had a perforated colon from a diverticular disease, which is common wear and tear of the colon. He was one of the youngest patients I'd seen with this condition, and certainly the youngest with a perforation so bad as to require an operation. When I was counseling him on the operation, which involves removing the perforated part of the colon and giving him a colostomy, he told me his biggest concern was how he was going to do it in the butt with his same-sex partner. He'd only have a small stump of rectum left inside, which would be at risk of perforation with any force applied to it. It really made me think about the implications of the surgery we do. The operation was the easy part. I was the patient. I had a liver transplant and was having an ERCP done to place a new bile duct stent. Well, apparently my anatomy is different than normal and my lungs go more down on my sides. So he accidentally caused a nick, which caused a hemothorax. So when I woke up, I couldn't breathe. They did an x-ray and had to do a chest tube. Eventually, I was so exhausted I asked to be vented, so he vented me. Apparently he cried. He felt so bad about it all. But it wasn't him being malicious or negligent, it was just an accident. My uncle is a respirologist and was supervising, sitting in on a lung surgery to remove a tumor. Turns out the tumor was a ball of roots. Some kind of seed had gotten into the patient's lungs and started to grow. Husband went in for a routine colonoscopy, and as they were prepping him, an anesthetist asks him if he's a ginger. My husband tells him, yeah. When he was a kid growing up, he had fire engine red hair, though it's faded to more of a strawberry blonde now. The anesthetist laughs and says, "Okay, gotcha, we'll give you the redhead dosage," and winks. Well, my husband thinks it's a funny, until he wakes up at the tail end of the procedure, pun intended, and the doctors are just chatting it up and what have you. Turns out it's not a joke and redheads have some kind of natural block to anesthesia. The guy had given him the max allowable dosage and he still woke up. It happened a couple of years later. They gave him ketamine and some other crap to knock him out to get wisdom teeth out when he told the dentist about the colonoscopy thing. He still woke up at the end of that one too. Okay, so now this video has traumatized every redhead who might have a surgery in the foreseeable future. At least now you're aware. Although, to be fair, the surgeons in this story were still aware and stuff really went awry anyway. Oof. When I was in pharmacy school, I was doing my internal medicine rotation in the final year. My preceptor and I were doing med reviews in the ICU when one of the pulmonary docs was basically like, "Hey, you want to see something cool?" They were trying to extract a foreign object from a guy's lung in one of the rooms. So he went in and watched. About 6 people in the room, tube down the guy's throat, little grippers at the end, 2 doctors watching a monitor and trying to control the grabbers and get it like a claw game. I watched them for a bit, then after a while I lost interest and went back to what I was doing. Then a few minutes later I hear, "Got it!" cheers from the room. Oh, it's a tooth! The guy aspirated his own molar. Doctor walked out with his trophy in a jar and it was completely intact, tooth root and all. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I heard an "oh no" moment as a patient on the operating table. A couple of years ago, I was in labor for 28 hours, pushing for 6, when my child started showing signs of distress. He had a slightly elevated heart rate and the makings of a fever. My midwife at the hospital told me the doctor was coming in to check to see if a vacuum assist could help. She checks me and immediately stands up with blood on her hand and says we're going to the OR now. At the time, I started feeling that zoomed-out tunnel vision, which I know for me is shock. I had anxiety, but figured she knew what she was doing. She did. We got to the OR 8 minutes later, then they opened me up. I heard the surgeon say, oh no, look at this. They saw blood in my catheter bag and upon fully opening me up found out my son was actually trying to come through my uterus. He had ruptured it. They got my son out. Those moments where he was stunned and not crying were an eternity. He cried and was born a completely healthy baby. After I woke up and was back in my room, the doctor came in and told me what happened. I knew a ruptured uterus sounded bad, but damn, I googled and started having a massive anxiety attack. A ruptured uterus is an extremely rare and so very dangerous and often fatal thing. I read from the time it happens, you have about 15 minutes before both parties are no longer alive. When I went back for my post-C-section follow-up, my midwife let me know as a practice that's been around 35 years with over 30 midwives and doctors, they'd never once encountered that, and it was such a big deal for them a few days after my birth that they all got together to discuss my case. I was so incredibly fortunate I chose to go into labor in that hospital, that the doctor just knew from my vitals and baby that something was off. They just didn't know until they got me open. I can't even tell you how grateful I am for Dr. S. You saved my life and my son's life, and our family will forever be grateful. So this was a military dentist. Yes, they put me under and no insurance was involved. Not sure what they used for anesthesia. Anyway, wisdom teeth removal, all 4 impacted, gotta break out the heavy hardware. I was knocked out. Didn't even know the dentist entered the room. I wake up, but unable to move. Just eyes open, awake, but my limbs won't react to my brain. I can feel the dentist hammering a chisel into my tooth to break it for extraction. My jaw is just coming undone on every hit. Yes, I could feel pain from the impact, but not nerve pains in the actual tooth. My eyes are wide open, jaw even wider with some evil metal contraption. I'm staring at the assistant, begging for her to see me, and after about a dozen hammers to my jaw, she glances over and drops the suction, jumps up and shrieks. The dentist stops to look at her, then looks at me and I see him say, oh crap. Next thing I know, I'm waking up post-surgery. That was the stuff that nightmares are made of. My "oh no" moment was 8 years after finishing medical school and deferring student loans through residency and fellowship, and then realizing that I was closer to 40 than 30 with over $200K in student debt. Just a resident nurse here, I was working in the ER and had a patient brought in by her husband. Apparently, the woman had fallen a week prior and injured her face, but refused medical care. Her husband finally forced her to come in. As soon as I see the wound on her face, from across the room, I think, that does not look like any wound I've ever seen. I approached her and realized maggots had infested the wound and were eating the rotten skin. A really simple and quick fix, but I can't imagine her living conditions. I had an ingrown toenail. It was supposed to be a quick fix. I was 14 and had my mum with me. They let an apprentice do the surgery and he just goes, oh no. The doctor in charge just laughed and said, no risk, no fun, right? Turns out they messed up my toe and I had to have 4 more surgeries to correct it. I cried. When I was in med school, there was an oh crap moment for everyone, including the surgeons, anesthetists, nurses, and students. They were prepping a patient for surgery and put him under, and the nurse said, okay, he's out, before they were about to start slicing him open. The patient had just enough strength to look over and say, no, I'm not out yet. Everyone laughed it off, but if the patient hadn't done that, it could have ended so badly. I'm a scrub nurse. During a lab nephrectomy, urologist mistook the abdominal aorta for the renal artery, placed the staple gun on the aorta, did not wait the recommended 30 seconds before slicing, cut the abdominal aorta clean in half, patient immediately crashes, activate massive transfusion protocol, and the patient was somehow alive when they went up to the ICU. Definitely our worst, oh no, moment. When I was a surgery intern, I was pulled from doing scut work to help out in a crap show of a case. One of our Professor Emeritus was in surgery and doing a simple liver biopsy on a patient and then nicked her hepatic artery. The biopsy was for a recurrent tumor and the patient had been on chemoradiation. What all that basically means is that the patient has a hole in a major artery and her tissue has the consistency of toilet paper. Every time they tried suturing the hole, the tissue just breaks apart, leaving a bigger, more leaky hole. Pretty much all hands were on board. The chief residents were scrubbed in, the seniors were literally squeezing blood bags into the patient's veins, and us interns were runners, going back and forth from OR to blood bank to transport blood and plasma. We ended up transfusing over 40 units, 12 liters of blood, so the patient lost over 2 times her total blood volume during that surgery. A vascular surgeon eventually swooped in and did a rather slick patchwork that fixed the problem. Even better, the patient was like a daughter to the surgeon. He'd literally saved this patient's life several times already, and they got really close over the years. She'd even named one of her kids after him. The poor guy broke down a few times during the surgery and was convinced he'd just killed this lady. The chief residents had to take over a few times when he was just mentally not there. That was his final surgery. He retired the next day. Hell of a way to end a surgical career. Good God, that is indeed not a fun final day of work to have, and not a great lingering memory to fixate on when you presumably have decades of saving people in your past. I hope he got counseling. I work in cardiovascular, and I can think of a couple. In my 8-year career, I've had 3 patients start moving their arms in the middle of open-heart surgery. One of them even tried to sit up. The surgeon was literally pushing the patient's shoulders down and yelling for anesthesia to give the patient something. Another time, a simple pericardial window. For different reasons, sometimes patients can have extra fluid build up in the pericardial sac that surrounds the heart. The surgeon made a small hole and stuck the sucker in to suction the fluid out and to make room for the heart. He stuck the sucker in too far and struck it through the ventricle. Blood shot out of the small hole just below the sternum. He had to quickly open up the patient more under the ribs so he could stick his hand in to plug the hole with his finger. We had to call another surgeon in to help quick crash onto the heart-lung machine. During my 3rd year of medical school, I was stitching up the wound after surgery, and the anesthesiology nurse woke up the patient too early as I was making my last stitch, and I felt the patient moving her arm and trying to sit up. Patient was still covered in surgery draping and cables and still intubated. Luckily, most people don't remember much from the first moments after waking up, but I got quite nervous from the patient starting to move. Not a surgeon, but when I was in nursing school, I was observing a tonsillectomy when the power went out. Everything switched over to the backup generators except for the suction, which is incredibly important for any surgery, but particularly in the throat. There's an aspiration risk, you see. They ended up having to connect a giant syringe to a length of suction tubing to suction manually while someone went to the other side of the buildings to find portable suction. Luckily, ours was the only theatre that had started operating that morning. My mum had to have a kidney removed due to her waiting for almost 2 years to go to the doctor about a pain in her back. The doctors found it was a large kidney stone and that her kidney was infected and had lots of gross pus shutting it down. After draining the fluids through tubes over the course of a month and a half, she was finally ready for surgery. Cue last Wednesday, the day of the surgery. She was ready to be finally done with it. They removed the stent put in and the tubes no problem. Next was the kidney. And here comes the oh no moment. As they get ready to remove the kidney, there are complications. The kidney's infection had spread to a portion of her lung and a major artery, making them about as fragile as toilet paper. As the surgeon removed the kidney, a hole was torn in the lung, and even worse, the artery was severed. At that point, it was a race to save her life and stabilize her. I don't remember much about how they fixed her up there, but they had to fly her to a different hospital and have a heart surgeon fix the severed artery in a more permanent fashion. Anyway, the heart doctor saw the grave situation and said she's got a 1% chance for her to make it, but he did such an excellent job that my mum is still alive and getting stronger each day. The moral of this story is, if you have insurance and are experiencing pain, go to a doctor as soon as you realize it. It might save your life and also some doctors from an oh crap moment like this. Not mine, but my father's. He told me this back when I was 10, so I'm sorry if it doesn't fully make sense. He had a 21-year-old patient that needed to have a penectomy. He had cancer of the downstairs area. There were 2 oh crap moments for this. The first is a common thing. He wasn't fully asleep. The second, however, is funny and humiliating. They were about to start the surgery. Suddenly, one of the nurses that was there suddenly threw up and left. A test later, and boom! She got knocked up. Halfway through the surgery, the other nurse leaves for a call about her father. My dad's just standing there, a half-ruined manhood in his hand. He calls for help and is just standing there, a man's pride and joy in his hand for 30 minutes. I was having surgery on my chest to remove what they suspected was cancer. It was benign, but either way, I woke up during the surgery and I looked up and saw 4 people with scrub caps on staring down at me. I looked at my exposed mammary gland in pure horror, and that's all I remember because they knocked me back out. It still makes me want to chuck up just thinking about it. I was only 13. I was around 13 or 14 and undergoing gallbladder removal. Almost unheard of for someone my age to have gallstones bad enough to need one. But anyway, I was extremely underweight and sickly. The anesthetist gave me an adult dose of anesthesia and knocked me out for about 8 hours, when it took the surgeon about 40 minutes to complete my surgery, so there was a lot of panic that day because nobody could wake me up. And I was angry when I woke up because I couldn't feel my left arm with the IV in, and I really needed to pee. I tried to get up to go to the loo and ended up on the floor instead. They also got me a potty that I refused to use.
Redditors who grew up filthy rich. What did you think was normal till you learned otherwise? Honestly, it was the little things. I knew we had nicer cars than average, a bigger house, went on more trips, etc., but I thought everyone's refrigerator had wood-paneled cabinet doors. For example, we had a Sub-Zero built-in refrigerator and freezer. The first time I saw a metal fridge, I thought it was weird, and I thought it was even weirder that the fridge and freezer were combined. But then I got really jealous because you could put magnets on it. I also thought everyone had a central vacuum system where you can sweep dirt into a little hole under the cabinets by the floor and it sucks it up. We had these little holes all over in every room, stuff like that. Yeah, we had those and a bunch of other crap I thought was normal but was not normal. We had touchscreen TVs that controlled the HVAC, security, and lights and sound system before touchscreens were even a thing. I'm talking mid-1990s. It wasn't even a flat screen. It was a deep dish TV with a touchscreen. I had personally never heard of a central vacuum system in all my 27 years on this planet, but now that they've explained what it is, I do believe I have in fact seen them. And they sound cool as hell. I would totally have one. However, on the topic of refrigerators, I will never be surprised at the lengths humanity will go to preserve and refrigerate food, and frankly, the sky is the limit with refrigerator technology. At least until we get Mr. Freeze-Ray from the Batman. Probably a weird example, but growing up, all of our dishes were made of fine china, Waterford glassware, etc. And I just thought that's what plates and stuff were made of because we didn't have anything else. Then one time I went to a friend's house for dinner and we ate on colored plastic plates and non-matching plastic cups. I just thought that was the weirdest thing ever and asked why we were eating with camping dishes. That's kind of rude, but when I was a kid, I didn't have a filter either. I just said whatever came to mind. I myself am not rich, but I have an uncle who is very well off. So one of my not rich aunts was complaining about her car acting up on her. Well, my cousin from the rich family was listening and got really confused. So he just asked her, well, why don't you just get rid of it and go buy another one? This kid was probably 13 or so at the time and had no concept of not enough money. He couldn't understand why you wouldn't just go get a new something if your old something didn't work.
Oh, to be young and naive and not understand how disposable income works or the value of it.
I would say rich in the area by comparison. I think the moment it really sunk in was during 5th or 6th grade around middle school. I felt like I was getting too cool for little kid parties, so I decided I wanted to go somewhere and do something fun. My parents were super excited about this, since it meant I was taking one stupid middle schooler with us on a mini trip instead of having 15 stupid middle schoolers in the house. I decided on a trip to some festival, which meant a ferry ride and then drive to a Canadian city and have a big fancy meal. The girl I picked had been my friend for years. I had no idea her life was so different. She lost her mind on the ferry. It was so fun. She had never seen Canada before, so we stopped and took her picture. My parents, realizing immediately that this was a huge deal for this girl, bought her and I souvenirs, which she later gave to her mom since her mom has never left the area. My mom would not let her order the cheapest thing on the menu, which I never realized is something poor children are trained to do. I thought you could just pick whatever you wanted to eat. She was the first person in her family to travel more than 30 miles from her house. This was pre-9/11, when a family could just take a random child with no ID and a permission slip from their parents into another country. We are both adults now and occasionally run into each other. She's married with 4 children and still talks about the time we rode a ferry and went to Canada. Had she not brought it up, I probably would have forgotten. It's probably just the words they used, but there's something about the way this individual writes that rubs me the wrong way. I don't know if they intended to, but yeah, whatever. I lived overseas for a year when I was in high school and attended an international school where, though my family was decidedly middle class in the US and my dad was being paid several times more to work abroad than he had been at home, I'm fairly certain my family were the least well off in the entire school. None of these kids ever seemed to realize how fabulously wealthy they were. A few examples. Several boys from North Korea. I don't know exactly how high up in the political world of the DPRK you need to be allowed to send your children abroad for an education, but these kids showed up to school in brand new Benzes for a start. One friend of mine lived in a luxury high-rise in the single richest enclave of the city where I lived. His parents lived on the 16th floor. Each floor was a single unit. He lived on the 17th floor, in his own unit. He had his own live-in maid and driver as well. Another friend's parents ran the largest import and export company in the country. He had 2 bodyguards and was driven around in his own armored bulletproof SUV. Windows were 2 inches thick and didn't roll down. I attended his birthday, which was on his dad's 180-foot super yacht. It was not uncommon for my friends to spend 3-day weekends in Bali, the Maldives, or wherever their vacation homes happened to be. I'm still friends with several of them through social media, and the most frequent post I see from several of them is off to blank for the week, then on to blank and blank, those locations almost always being on 3 separate continents. Rich North Koreans, I never thought I'd hear those words put together unless they were following up Kim Jong-un. My father was a successful chemical engineer/manufacturer and private pilot. I spent my childhood in a gated flying community with a fully functioning airport. Not only did we have a garage full of your everyday vehicles, we also had an airplane hangar full of classic cars that my daddy enjoyed restoring. World War II era warbirds as well as the modern 2-engine planes he used to fly to business meetings. We own property in Nantucket and St. Martin, and we're constantly taking extemporaneous vacations. John Travolta would walk over from time to time and shoot the breeze with my dad in our hangar up until he made Pulp Fiction and was slingshotted back into relevancy. I remember having playdates with his son, Jet, was also family friends with well-known NASCAR drivers and would spend a lot of time at their mansions hanging out with their kids, driving around on golf carts and shooting paintball guns. Everyone I knew had airplanes, nice cars, big homes, and what seemed like an endless supply of wealth. That was my normal. When I was about 4 years old, I made a new friend at school and was invited to spend the afternoon over at his house. It was an eye-opening experience, to say the very least, and when I returned home, still very confused, I remember saying something along the lines of, "Mommy, they live in a really small house and they don't have an airplane hangar." My mother was slightly horrified at the realization that this was my reality and had to explain to me that not everyone has the same things that we have. Life has changed a lot for me since the 90s. When I moved away for college, my dad suffered a series of mini-strokes which subsequently caused progressive dementia. Towards the end, he couldn't even tell you what year it was. My father passed away in January, and I've been spending a lot of time recently looking through old photo albums and listening to stories. Maybe that's why I felt compelled to share all of this with you guys. Being rich is nice, don't get me wrong, but I would give it all back in a heartbeat just to spend a little more time with the dad I used to know, the man who was the master of his own universe. There was still so much to learn from him, but what I'm left with are the cherished memories of my childhood that will forever put into perspective just how lucky I really was. Rocking it out with John Travolta post-Saturday Night Fever, flying planes? That sounds like the life to me. I've actually flown a plane once before. Other than that, sorry about your dad, mate.
One, I thought every family had staff. We had a chef, gardener, chauffeur, 2 nannies, handyman/errand guy, took care of the house, picked up dry cleaning, bought supplies, washed the dogs, handled maintenance and repairs, and 2 maids. These were full-time and several lived with us. We had a host of part-time staff as well. When I went to college, I was shocked by how everyone took care of themselves so well, when I barely knew how to tie my own shoes. 2. My private school had many Forbes 500 billionaire families, kids of world leaders, and general global establishment types. If we ever needed something anywhere, someone's parents or relatives or friend would have a connection. I just assumed that's how the world worked. 3. Money was always just an afterthought. Nobody ever asked anyone how much something cost. If you just liked something, you got it. Again, interacting with regular people in college was a huge eye-opener. 4. respect. Everywhere I would go, either with my family or friends or their families, we were treated with what I understand now is a ridiculous amount of respect. It's hard to explain this one, but I think others in the same situation understand.
I feel like respect is a topic that we don't speak about enough nowadays, in that it isn't inherently given to you, but rather you are supposed to earn it. And I'm actually glad that this person, regardless of their social status or anything like that, is aware of this. And everyone should remember that. You don't owe anyone that you don't know personally respect. You only owe them an ounce of common human decency. Respect is earned through personal interaction. So, growing up, I knew my family and extended family was better off than others once high school came around, but it didn't really sink in until college. My parents immigrated from Iran to the US. I was a little kid and didn't have anything. My parents had engineering degrees, civil and computer, but my father wasn't allowed to work in our home country because he studied in the West. When we came here, they didn't speak English, so they couldn't work in their profession either. My mom stayed home, and my brother and me and my father worked several jobs. He saved up, along with a bit of money that was finally unfrozen, and started a small business. It grew very rapidly, but my parents didn't really change their own lifestyle. Since I was too young to really know what money is spent on when we were poor, it didn't really occur to me that we became rich. I just assumed this is what everyone in America did. The American dream, and that everyone else was like this, starts poor and then can afford all sorts of stuff. It didn't help that my middle school and high school were very split between rich and poor, so I figured the latter group was just in the process. I always heard college was expensive and some people could afford it, or that their parents had to save up or the kid had to get a job. I thought it was $1 million per year. I figured that seemed like something people couldn't afford. I based that on thinking that the lower class made $1 million a year, so spending a year's wage on 1 year of college would be unreasonable. Then I found out the average salary was less than my brother would spend partying in a weekend in college. Also, allowances growing up. I never had one, and everyone else did, so I figured they were all rich. Then one day I found out this girl I was seeing at the end of high school had an allowance of $50 a month, and it blew my mind. To my parents' credit, we immigrated to the States with nothing, and they built a business that was successful. Also raised us very frugal. My dad still drives a 2006 Jeep Liberty and my mom a 2009 Ford Expedition. My brother and a few cousins love spending, though. Edit. Turns out the Liberty is a 2001 and the Expedition is 2003. They taught us to be very disciplined and financially savvy. I worked my ass off to go down the route of being a physician and on the side started a business. They made sure they didn't help me financially so I could learn how it was to grow a business. Fast forward several years and it became successful enough that I focus on the business instead of being in medicine. I'm not far wealthier than they are and plan on giving the same type of discipline to my children. One of my best friends whom I met in college is very similar. His parents own a multi-million-dollar company and throughout school he had to have a job and pay for everything himself. Did anyone else think I sounded really cool when I said the American dream?
I'm not from a wealthy family, but my step-grandparents are really quite well off, living up in their mansion in the hills. 2 of my stepbrothers were fostered to them by their mother, while the unlucky third lived in squalor with her. I didn't even realize the double standard that was out there until one Christmas when the 2 fostered brothers got an Xbox 360 and 10 games each. The console had only just been released, whilst the other brother got a single game for his PlayStation 2 and a $20 note, and I got given the same thing. Despite not even being blood, and my father being hated by them. At some stage, my third stepbrother's existence reached critical mass and became an alcoholic. At age 8, a couple years ago, his mother and my father were outed as being addicts to certain illegal substances, which resulted in them having their children taken away by Child Protective Services at the behest of my grandparents, one of whom is very high up in child services. My 2 half-sisters were taken by my wonderful and somewhat well-off grandparents, one of whom works for child services and who are genuinely family-loving, intelligent people who gave a breath of fresh air and a better outlook on life to two girls who knew nothing of the sort, taking great care of them while my stepbrother got sent to live with his dad, the one who supplied him with his alcohol and an abuser of illegal substances himself. I have no idea where he is now, but I don't have high hopes for his future. Meanwhile, his brothers are at university making a future for themselves with everything all paid for them. Sorry for the rant which got sidetracked by the sad story of a very unlucky boy, but it is quite a good demonstration of the difference wealth can have on the outcome of your life, and how unlucky some people can be. Sure, the wealthy have their periods of bad luck, of course, but when you're already in a terrible situation, it tends to be compounded, and some people are too young to be able to deal with these kinds of things, or even have a semblance of influence on their own life, and it often leads them down dark roads that will likely perpetuate the cycle of poverty, or often simply just ending a promising young life. TLDR, have 3 stepbrothers. 2 were raised by wealthy grandparents and are well off and educated. 1 has lived a life of poverty and suffering, and as such, has a very bleak future in store, though he is only young.
That was honestly just kind of depressing, to be honest. My parents are filthy rich, but they try to keep us humble-ish, so our main house is actually our smallest. I thought it was small because every room feels essential. There's a kitchen, bedrooms, bathrooms, a casual dining room, a formal dining room, a family room, a lounge room, which is really just the formal family room, a study for each of my parents, a conservatory, 2 playrooms for the kids, again, one more formal than the other, a gym, a cellar, and an indoor pool. It was small in my head because I could name every room. Some of our other houses are big enough that they have a lot of random useless spaces that you don't know how to name. It has some couches in it. It's a sitting room. You get stuff like the lobby and the mezzanine. So I sort of thought that everything in our small house was essential. At age 10-ish, I was absolutely flummoxed to find that people put swimming pools outside. You may as well have told me that your bathroom was outside, like an old-style outhouse. Every one of our houses has a pool on the inside. I later found out that my parents did that on purpose because we're all pale as get out, and an outdoor pool would get us all very crispy and sunburned. Imagine my surprise when I found at about age 14 that some people didn't have pools at all. And then when I went to university that some people can't even swim. There was a lot of little stuff too. Everyone can eat with chopsticks, read music, know basic Latin, has a signet ring, or at least freaking know what one is, know which cutlery to use. I remember wondering if my friends were messing with me at a semi-formal university event in first year. It was a round table and no one knew which bread roll was theirs. Has an assortment of outfits of all possible dress codes ready to go at a moment's notice. Can I come to the gala tonight? Absolutely, no problem.
Suppose that you were sitting down at this table. The bread rolls are in front of you. Which bread roll would you take? The one on your left or the one on your right? Usually you would take the one on your left side. That is correct. But in a larger sense on society, that is wrong. Perhaps I could even substitute society with the universe. The correct answer is that it is determined by the one who takes his or her own bread roll first. Just a little Steel Ball Run reference for my fellow JoJo fans. I was always amazed that people didn't have a closet full of clothes like me. I know that sounds stupid, but I wore Gap, Tommy Hilfiger, and all that other nonsense, and my mom made sure we all looked amazing. My best friend had like 2 pairs of shorts from Goodwill. I literally could not believe it. I got in trouble for trying to give her my play clothes, which were all still designer clothes, just ones I had had for a couple years. That and cars. I remember asking my friend's mom why she was upset waiting for her dad to get home from work so she could use the car. Can't you just use yours? The concept that some families could only afford one car blew my mind. Granted, I wasn't filthy rich at all, but when I switched to public school in 5th grade, my choice, very against what my parents wanted, my new friends all were in shock at my neighborhood and house. To me, it was just normal. All my private school friends had much bigger homes than me, some even with private planes. I am probably so wrong, but I always kind of think when someone has a private jet, that is like the 1%. I didn't necessarily grow up super rich, but my dad made between $500 and $750K a year while growing up. I think he makes closer to $750 to $1 mil now, and I had a few moments like this. My dad is usually a frugal person, but since he grew up poor, he afforded himself some luxuries. It wasn't until at least high school that I realized how out of the ordinary it was for both of my parents to have $30,000 watches.
I think the biggest shock was college. It was totally paid for by my parents. They paid out of a 529 plan, but for my sister now and brother after they never set one up and are just paying right out of salary. I knew kids would have to take debt on, but I honestly thought until about a year ago, just graduated last May, that most kids would graduate with 10K debt max. It wasn't until just recently I learned some kids were taking on double that or more each year. It shocked me. And also made me thank my parents extensively for saving me from 100K or more debt by paying for college. I wouldn't say I was filthy rich, but I was definitely given a lot of advantages and head starts in life because of my dad's money. I can't imagine what growing up with an extremely rich parent gets you advantage-wise if my dad was able to give me everything he has. The only money I really think about regularly is my money, but it's kind of crazy to think about the different echelons of richness there are. Late to the party. Before my dad died, he was murdered when I was 7, we were super rich. He owned his own company and my mom owned her own business as well. I was telling my boyfriend the other day how she'd take us to the mall and just hand each of her 3 kids $500 and tell us to go wild for no reason. After he died, we fell into poverty and my mom went basically insane and lost the house, companies, and declared bankruptcy.
Well, that was genuinely a terrible tragedy what happened to your father and mother, but that is a superhero origin story right there. What was your high school's tragedy? We had this one teacher. She was the Quest teacher. It was a health class, basically. She talked about sexual education and the dangers of smoking, that sort of thing. We got to sit on couches in a big circle rather than desks in rows. She sadly contracted breast cancer, and it was pretty bad. She went bald from the chemo and had a port installed on her chest so they could just inject into that since they had already destroyed all the veins on her arms and whatnot. Despite all this hardship, she was one of the warmest, sweetest, most cheerful, and most loving people I have ever met. I'll always remember one particular thing that she said. She talked about going to a friend's funeral recently. The friend had died an agonizing and slow death from cancer. My teacher wore a brightly colored floral pattern dress while everyone else was wearing black. She did this because she was not mourning. She was celebrating the end of her friend's suffering. She had accepted death and made peace with it, and knew that it was just the natural course of life. She died a year later and the whole school was devastated, and I made sure to wear bright colors. I think that was actually rather beautiful. It's a natural thing as people to either deal with the death of those we love or our own expiration, but the fact of the matter is death is a natural part of life that we simply have to accept at some time or another. A girl named Joy, who was insanely happy and nice and popular, had an aneurysm and died. She was uncharacteristically mean that day and told everyone she had a headache. It happened in the hallway, and she just kinda slumped against the lockers. We found her when classes let out. One kid said, "Joy's here in the hall." A huge jock dude picked her up and took her to the nurse, and someone called 911. She had been dead for some time by then. Saddest thing I ever saw. She was the sweetest person. Ate lunch with the special kids a few times a month. She was a sophomore and insanely popular. She was really tiny, and at one time, at a dance, a weird rap mosh pit formed. Joy got to crowd surf. She really resembled a tiny, fairy-like girl. Our whole school mourned her for months. It's always a tragedy when a kind young person has their life inexplicably and suddenly taken away. I hope you rest in peace, Joy. I was only in 9th grade at the time. I think he was in 10th or 11th. But the dude was a stellar wrestler and all-around very nice guy. He would help the newer kids, like myself, in practice and give us tips on how to get better. Good-looking, friendly. You know, the typical star athlete that everyone loved. One night, he was at Harris Teeter, getting some groceries and was carjacked with his friends. They drove them both in their car about 5 counties away, told them to get out, put their shirts on their heads, and told them to run into the woods. As they did, they were shot. The friend managed to get away. I think he was wounded, but Louis was shot in the head. God, it's been years. This happened in the late 90s, but I can remember the dude like it was yesterday. It was a very sad time for our school. Here's a little story about how I met Louis and ended up on the wrestling team. I actually got caught skipping school by Coach Perry, wrestling and gym coach, in the 9th grade. I was very small, maybe 5'5", and like 105 pounds. I was playing Pokemon Red and Blue with a friend in the stairs that no one used that led up to the weight room. Coach Perry came in looking for some equipment. They used this stairwell as a storage closet. You really couldn't even go upstairs all the way because of everything blocking it. Nava was with him, helping him drag out mats for wrestling practice. My friend was immediately excused and sent back to class. I was told to help them get the mats out, which I did. I was afraid I was going to be suspended or that he was going to call my parents. I remember Louis patting me on the back and telling me everything was cool and that Coach Perry was going to make me an offer. After the mats were set up, Coach Perry and Nava talked for a moment, then called me over to a scale. I was told to get on. I weighed in at 104 or something like that, and Coach Perry and Louis just smiled. I was then told I had 2 choices: join the wrestling team or be taken to the offices to get rode up. Naturally, I chose wrestling and was running around the gym in a trash bag that evening. I literally knew nothing about wrestling. The stances, points, and everything else were unknown to me. After practice, we had scrims and I had to go against the 110 guys. I remember Louis taking me aside and showing me this killer leg swoop and grab. He let me practice it on him a few times, then I did it for real in the scrim. I remember it went perfect. Kid never knew what hit him and I put him on his back. Louis came over, gave me a high five and a big slap on the back, walked over to the coach and said, "Looks like we found our new 105 guy." 2 weeks or so later, he was dead. To this day, I still don't think I thanked him enough for being so cool to a freshman like that. He made sure I felt like I belonged on the team and wasn't just there to get out of trouble. Just a small story to show you the kind of dude Louis was. Always willing to help and a class act. Just a good all-round dude. I had planned on quitting after a few practices, but after his death, I stayed on the team for the full season. Just didn't seem right, because Louis would never have quit. This was both tragic and beautiful. Louis Nava, you sound like an absolute angel. I hope you rest in peace while your killers suck eggplants in hell. You know what I mean by that. Coach Perry, it sounds like an authority figure that you need at a school. Someone who is not only willing to dole out punishment where necessary, but also offer opportunity to someone who then went on to do a full season of wrestling, which they wouldn't have done otherwise. It's beautiful how these people helped inspire you, but also unbelievably tragic, which is why I say, people, you should cherish everyone that you meet and know, because anything can happen in this crazy world. Shying away from a death post, Catholic high school. 2 of our favorite teachers who had actually made their classes engaging and opened up their classroom to anybody needing a hand in school and in life had both divorced before they had started teaching there. They decided to move in together after dating for 2 years and were planning on getting married the next year. They kept it all quiet out of pure professionalism, and somehow administration found out and fired both of them. I believe for breaking the school's code of conduct for teachers by cohabiting before marriage. We lost 2 of the best teachers in our school that helped out and inspired their students in every way they could try to. This one actually makes me sad because a good teacher is really hard to find. When I was a kid, I did not appreciate my opportunity in education very often. I would be disrupting. If I was in a bad mood, I would have standoffs with teachers, and I just didn't really care. But now as an adult with that past, I greatly appreciate education, and I think everyone should. Teachers already have a hard time dealing with kids that disrespect them, but also when it's like administrative rules like that, the only thing I can really say is hopefully that didn't stop their plans of getting married, and I hope they still have each other. But at the end of the day, it still really sucks because now this school has been deprived of 2 people that seemingly really cared about education. In my final year of high school, there was an absolute poo storm regarding personal information that was accessed by half the grade using a teacher's login details. We had the password for years and used it to check marks and ranks of schoolwork, and all was good. In the final weeks of high school, some idiot decides to change his English mark, moving himself from 33rd to 3rd. The school obviously finds out, and everyone who is involved gets in trouble. The kid that changed his marks obviously got expelled, while the other half of the grade all got punished by not being permitted to attend the school formal and graduation. Next thing I know, everyone's starting a huge protest and some CEO or something gets involved and revoked the punishment because parents were threatening to get lawyers or something. Considering the teachers gave out the password willingly to another student and the school refused to admit the teacher's mistake, aggressively trying to blame the students for hacking when that simply wasn't the case. That one was honestly refreshing compared to everything else that we've been reading through, but don't get your hopes up, it is not about to get much happier. We had a teacher that for some reason everyone took a dislike to. He wasn't that bad or strict, but for some reason everyone hated him. I was in class once and we locked him in his equipment cupboard. Stuff like that regularly happened to him. He never really used to say anything, just kinda got on with it. Eventually, he split from his wife and lost his driving license for drink driving. He ended up having to get the bus in the morning with everyone traveling to school. As always, Everyone was really cruel to him. Halfway through year 9, he decided to commit self-deletion. The worst thing about that was that everyone found it really funny. Adult me is feeling very ashamed of teenage me right now. Edit. Yes, I'm aware of how awful this story is. The man was clearly battling some severe depression at the time. This was roughly 18 years ago in the Midlands, UK. He taught woodwork. No, he wasn't physically pushed into his equipment cupboard. He used to go in there to get equipment and drink alcohol. One day when he was in there for a long period, someone just locked the door. I can't remember how long for, but it was during a 2-hour session and he was outside for most of it. I'm hoping that it was just a couple of minutes, but it could have been longer. I didn't get the school bus and only had his class for one term. This was a problem the whole school were involved in. There were roughly 1,250 students in the school. Everyone in the school had this same outlook towards him. He had previously gotten into arguments with parents, although I don't know the reason for this. The teachers knew about it, but I think with his drinking issues, they weren't sure how to handle it. They were very slow in telling us that he had died, and by the time they figured out how to address the issue, everyone knew. So I think no one knew how to handle the situation. No one reveled in his death, no one knew what to do, and I think the jokes may have been people's attempt at handling the situation. So for one thing, I'm glad that this person feels bad about the way that this individual was treated. You shouldn't feel bad about it all your life because you probably didn't have like a direct hand in it by any means, but I'm glad you feel bad. So I picked this story out specifically because I come from the Midlands of the UK, specifically the West Midlands, based on the calculations of when it was posted and the 18 years. I was not in high school at this point, it seems. But seriously, if you find someone who's being treated like utter crap for seemingly no reason whatsoever, just check on them, please. Like, a bit of kindness goes a real long way, and it can even maybe prevent someone from making a stupid decision. This was just really sad. We had 3 heart-wrenching, oddly connected tragedies in 1 year. When I was a junior, a girl lost control of her car and crashed. The impact ended her life, but her 2 passengers were okay. She was a wonderfully nice girl, always smiling, participating in an ROTC drill team. The school was shaken by her sudden passing. I attended her funeral and cried my eyes out, wondering how her family managed to not cry 24/7. My brother was a pallbearer. A month later, a senior boy crashed into another vehicle while on his way to an ROTC drill team practice early in the morning, way before school started. He was the captain of the team, a quiet leader, gifted, known for solving Rubik's Cubes in class. My brother. He was comatose. The pallbearer's carnation from the girl's funeral was still on his desk. Its water had been poured out, and the white flower was dying slowly. As if that wasn't enough, a sophomore boy was involved in a collision just a few days later when he was leaving the school. He died instantly. Oddly enough, he was involved in ROTC extracurriculars too. The news hit me like a ton of bricks as I sat in the hospital's waiting room. My brother died in the hospital about a week later. I was allowed to stay home for the rest of the school year. At his funeral, I understood why the family of the deceased doesn't sob their way through the service. We had moved to a place beyond tears. We finally took his old furniture out of his room today. I cried thinking about the pallbearer's carnation sitting on his desk. My high school's tragedy will follow me for the rest of my life. I totally get that part about the being beyond tears bit when you're at a funeral. I have not had that many losses in my family until about 3 years ago with my grandmother, and it was heartbreaking. I won't go into details, but I completely understand. Rest in peace to all of those people. Countless. One student was run over by an 18-wheeler in front of his family. One very popular teacher went home one day feeling ill and passed away 2 days later from cancer he didn't know he had. 2 different teachers committed self-deletion, multiple drunk driving deaths, a drug-related multiple murder, another drug-related murder, a CP case, a teacher who molested several students, and 1 student allegedly killed by the Boston bomber years before the bombing. I think that just sounds like a cursed school. I'm so sorry to the victims of those occurrences that didn't die, and rest in peace to those that did. I gotta say, I have picked some really depressing topics to talk about on this channel, like, goddamn, strap in, people. An English/drama teacher got a role on a late-night TV show. Got the twins out on TV and had to quit teaching. Was a tragedy for us that she left. She was a hot younger teacher, and suddenly drama class had a lot less male students. I do hope you enjoyed that slightly funny one while you can, because it's about to get a little depressing again. We had a security guard named Creighton. He was the most kind-hearted man you will have ever met. He smiled at everyone and was open to talking to you no matter who you were. I remember him overseeing detention, and it was my first time during my freshman year. He walked up to me, and I was scared to bits, and he told me, "You see this room? Don't ever come back here. You're better than it. Don't let me down." I never got in trouble again because of him. Senior year, he was diagnosed with cancer, and it was already too late. He became this skinny ghost of what he used to be, but he continued to smile and cheer up everyone's lives until his last day alive. The day he passed, I think the entire school cried. I credit him for making me who I am today, because of how supportive he was. Like I said, man, you just gotta check on people, show them some support, give them some motivating words or something, It doesn't work for everyone, I'm not gonna lie to you, but goddamn. Rest in peace, Creighton. I have two stories to tell. One is the story that affected me the most personally, and the other is a story that shows the true courage and strength of a guy I did not personally know. The first two stories begins with a German kid, me, who moved to the States and started going to American school. Once I was in middle school, a boy named Blake approached me and started asking me to translate this long list of words he had made to German, asking me to sound them out for him so that he could learn. He was obsessed with World War II and the Germans, so he began to befriend me. I personally thought he was incredibly annoying. One day, he invited me over and I decided why not and went to his home. Ever since, we became best friends. Once high school rolled around, I was more focused on school and he began hanging out with the wrong crowd. We both had carpentry classes and shared this big senior locker to keep our tools in. I was working for a friend's dad when I got a call that he had gone out drinking and got into a fatal car accident. His car hit a semi-truck. He got knocked unconscious and his car was on fire. My middle school best friend burned to death and all they could find were his teeth. I still tear up thinking about it. The worst part is all of a sudden everyone that barely knew him is acting like they were his best pals and some girl that he dated for 3 months got to speak at his funeral. Yet I didn't even get to sit up front because all 150 people that knew him seemed to show up because it was the popular thing to do. I can't be too bitter though because I'm glad that many people showed up for him. The worst part was cleaning out his side of the locker. That honestly still haunts me today. Rest in peace, Blake. The second story I'm not too familiar with, only that 3 friends were driving back from somewhere on the highway in a 2-seater coupe. The friend in the middle wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and they got into an accident. However, the guy in the passenger seat moved over to grab the guy sitting in the middle, which saved his life. But he himself was thrown through the glass window several yards and was fatally wounded. His last words were, "I'm sorry," and he died there on the concrete outside of his friend's car. I'm not religious, but for Blake's sake, I hope there is a God, and that one day I'll see him again. But not the Blake I knew in high school. I want to see the Blake I knew in middle school. This one was sort of interesting because a similar thing actually happened in my high school where someone I did personally know died. I wasn't amazing friends with them or anything, but I chose to silently mourn them and stay at school the day while a lot of people across the year group went to attend the funeral because they wanted an early day off school, even though a lot of them didn't actually know him. This will probably get buried, but I have to participate in this. My high school was known in the area for having a sophomore curse, where something awful happened to a sophomore every year. Obviously, that's silly, but it just always ended up being true. The year I was a sophomore, a girl I'd been in school with my entire life, but wasn't close friends with, died of rabies. I heard that she had been bitten by a raccoon while taking out garbage. Also heard that she was uncharacteristically mean and angry a few days before her death. I had always known her to be exceptionally shy and quiet, probably sweet, but I can't say I really knew that. It happened very suddenly. She was out of school for what I heard was the flu, and then maybe a day and a half later, she died. Her parents still release butterflies in our town every year on the anniversary. She was an only child. I wish I had sent them a card or something. The tragedy that was more personal to me, though, was a guy who had died in a car accident. He was driving in the rain and his car flipped over into a creek and he drowned. We were really close. He was 1 year older than me, but we'd been in a program that mixed 2 grades together since first grade. He'd been one of my first boyfriends when that meant making out on marching band trips. And we'd been on school trips to big cities together. The night the accident happened, I had been chatting with him on AOL Instant Messenger when he said he had to go meet our other friends to go see Star Wars. A few hours later, that friend called me asking if I had spoken to him because he'd never shown up. Crazy thing is, I thought absolutely nothing about it at the time. I just figured he got distracted or his mom had decided not to let him go. He was also a very treasured only child, just like the girl from my grade. The next morning, I got to school, and everything was completely quiet. It was so eerie to see no one saying anything, everyone just staring and crying. I walked up to the door of my homeroom, already sure that something horrible had happened, but I hadn't made the connection. Another close friend was standing outside the door, staring off into space. I asked him what was going on with everyone, and he just said his name died last night, in this chilling monotone. Before I could even form a thought, my mouth was filled with vomit. Not sure why my body reacted that way, but I spent an hour on the bathroom floor sobbing and puking until my mom came to get me. I still can't even write about it without tearing up. Rest in peace to both of those people, but this has just made me think about how lucky I am that I did not have a very close, personal, or important friend, ripped from me at a young age or anything like that. My God. So in my state flowers are illegal to pull out of the ground, but not illegal to buy and plant. Even on private property, you can be fined huge amounts of money per flower removed. Some seniors wanted to pull a prank by planting state flowers on the brand new football stadium field in the shape of 2008. And on top of 2008, they decided to also plant flowers in the shape of a phallic symbol, roughly 35 yards in length. None of them thought to check to see how much each flower would cost to remove. $5,000. The school, which was privately owned, couldn't possibly pay to remove the over 200 flowers the seniors planted. So every football game that season was played on top of a phallic symbol made of flowers. Eventually, someone was willing to break the law in order to remove them, and when we came in on a Monday, they were gone. They even filled the gaps with sod. Also, since then, the law has changed so that all you have to do to remove them is have a state representative present during the process, and you must replant them. So maybe some good came out of it. Also, the seniors were never caught or never announced publicly. That is honestly pretty funny, and I am so glad that I could end this on a slightly more upbeat note. This was kind of hard to read through to some degree, but all the stories were very interesting and really made me think about stuff.
What is your bullet frickin' dodge story?
I had trouble breathing and had been wheezing for a few months. Figured it was just bronchitis that I get all the time, and got some antibiotics. Figured what the hell, I guess I should ask a doctor. You know, the people trained in figuring this stuff out. Found a tumor the size of a pineapple wrapped around my heart and lungs. Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Definitely should have gone earlier, but so glad I actually decided to go. Edit. I'm alive, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Haha. For those commenting about the size of the tumor, it was a little over 5 by 3 inches and went from my trachea to my diaphragm. Double edit. 2.5 years cancer-free. Actually, as of yesterday. Didn't realize until today. Haha. Weird coincidence. At the time, it was not very good. I got to watch my pericardial drain surgery that night because they were afraid the anesthesia would make my trachea collapse. So I got to watch a surgery on myself, awake. Had to be at a 45-degree angle or the weight of the tumor pressed on my lungs, and under nothing except local anest for the catheter site. I like to think it's something not many people can say they've done. Advancing the catheter felt like slowly having the wind knocked out of you, but without the impact. I could actually feel almost exactly where it was as it went. Probably one of the most unique feelings I've ever felt. I could also feel the pop when they pierced my pericardium, and I could feel a very slight pressure relief as they drained the fluid initially.
First of all, I could not imagine being awake for my own surgery, but I guess a man's gotta do what a man's gotta do. And second, I don't know either, but where it's like, pop, I always just think about the bit from Superman versus the Elites. You can almost hear the pop. Lived outside St. Louis in my early childhood, woke up screaming in the worst pain of my life, and then I felt my face get sprinkled with something. I actually got shot in the hip, and when I sat up, a bullet went through my window right where my head was just at, and what sprinkled me in the face was tiny pieces of glass. So I dodged a literal bullet by taking a bullet. Edit. Really expected this to get lost in the sauce, but here are some details someone else asked about. So my bed was right next to my bedroom window, parallel to the wall. The end of the bed where my head was at was right next to the window. The bullet entered the wall and struck me in my left hip, so I guess I was sleeping on my stomach. The windows were real weird now that I think about it. It was actually 2 single-pane pieces of glass separated by 6 inches, and since both of them had a hole in them, you could stick a rod in and see that the bullet traveled right where my head had just been on my pillow.
Edit. Another side story connected to this now that I think about those windows. One time I came home from school, I noticed the inner window shattered and there was blood all over the place. Turned out it was my dog that tried to launch herself through the window. We were pretty certain that someone was at my window scoping it out. She was super defensive of all of us. I'm pretty sure this actually occurred after the shooting. Yeah, I'll admit, living in England my whole life, I don't think I could ever feel really, truly comfortable unless I am within a brick house. Not me, but I had a hand in it. Knew this guy in high school peripherally. He was in the cool crowd of rocker-type guys, and I was a nerd. New girl arrived at our school from another town. She and I became friends, and a few months later, she started dating him. At first, she seemed cool, and we would talk about everything. At one point, however, she started talking about how she's been hooking up with her ex-boyfriend behind cool guy's back. Just before the end of the school year, she tells me she's pregnant and that she knows it belongs to her ex-boyfriend. She's laughing and really proud of herself because cool guy is going to do the right thing. Withdraw his college application, go work at the local gas station to support her and the baby. Her ex, the father of the baby, is kind of a loser, so she thinks it's the best thing even that she can screw him while making cool guy support her. I didn't really know this guy that well, but I got his phone number from an acquaintance of mine who knew it. Cool guy knew I was friends with this girl, but was still pretty surprised to hear from me. I told him all about her ploy and said, "Get a paternity test. It isn't yours." This guy was incredibly stoic, but after a sizable pause, he just broke down crying for a few minutes. He then thanked me, they broke up, and cool guy went to college and made something of himself. Just a good old story about bros looking out for bros. Damn girl, how could you even try and do that to cool guy? He's cool guy.
When I was 7, I got lost in Spain without my family. I had been lost for about 5 hours, really late at night, and had been going down some dark alleyways and car parks. I started asking random strangers if they spoke English, but they were only middle-aged men walking around alone. One guy didn't speak English, but he gave me a cuddle and took me back to his house around the corner. At this point, I'm crying my eyes out and just appreciated the help and kindness. When I got to his house, it turned out that he had a family, and the son was learning English in school. He got out his school workbook and asked me my name, and then they took me to the police station. My parents picked me up about 10 minutes later as they were driving around in a police car. That man could have been anyone, and I could have been kidnapped and never seen again. Not your ordinary bullet dodge.
Honestly, that is such a tough call. You're 7 years old in a foreign country and you are dead lost. Oh, God. I mean, I guess, yeah, eventually you'd have to just go, sod it, I'm going to rely on the kindness of strangers, but straight up, I thought that story was going to get a lot worse before it got better.
I had my police car pulled over off the side of this rural road with the emergency lights on. I had stopped because there was a man splayed out in the middle of the asphalt. Turns out he was super drunk and decided to take a nap during his walk home. I had just helped him to his feet and placed him in the back of the car to drive him home when I hear an engine revving hard. I closed the car door and straightened up, just in time to have my car smashed out from in front of me by a pickup truck. I felt the truck's side mirror clip my body armor. The driver was drunk and had decided to go looking for his drunk friend. That friend was the guy I just picked up. The guy in the back seat survived the impact because those old Crown Victorias had massive trunks. The driver went to the hospital, and in the coming months he pled guilty for impaired driving. I remember the collision analysis showed the guy hit my car at 145 kilometers an hour. It was a wild night, and I still have major hang-ups when I have to stop my police car on roadways.
I have a good amount of respect for police. I don't think every cop is on the up and up, but if you've ever seen any of those like body cam footage things where stuff just hits the fan, my God, police, especially police in America, go through some wild stuff.
New teachers started at my high school at the start of the year, integrated fine. Students were assigned a pair of teachers to pay special attention to their academic needs. He was one of mine. Because of this, he knew I had a tense relationship with my parents. Because of the occasional sensitive material we covered in his English class, which I also took, he knew I had a telling sensitivity to sexual violence. As a teacher, he knew I was a troubled kid with a shaky support network. He gave me off-base but evidently well-intentioned advice about managing my controlling parents, worked with me and my other overseeing teacher to try and make school less nightmarish for me, and overall seemed like a warm, engaging guy. He gave some people the willies, but I felt fine around him. Then, middle of the week, a few months into the year, he doesn't show up. We're told he's not employed here anymore. No official details.
As you maybe guessed, turned out he had an alleged history of sexually abusing students at past jobs. I don't know how it had been handled that they were able to find this out without him having tripped any of the flags I assume exist in the screening for potential teachers, but I guess better late than never. I don't think the school ever got, prosecuted for screwing up or whatever, so I guess it was an understandable miss. But yeah, that would have been pretty freaking awful. I got lucky. Me and any other kids, he might have been charming. For the sake of keeping it fresh on the first take, I was going in with a wizard voice, and I kind of went, I don't think I want to use the wizard voice on this anymore. It got a little dark.
Dated this guy briefly in college. He got into a horse riding accident early on in the relationship. Horse fell on him, broke his ankle, pelvis, and hip. Apparently had a prior addiction to pain pills I was completely oblivious to. He quickly relapsed and turned into a crazy pill-popping psycho. Tried sticking out and helping him. I did my best and I couldn't handle it. When I told him I was done with the relationship, he proceeded to call me the worst names in the world, begged me to forgive him, and then tried asking me to come hang out after he had called me the biggest harlot in town. WTF. He then started doing harder stuff and has been involved in a hit-and-run accident. The guy he hit died. Ex moved the body, fled the scene, dumped his truck in a car park that had surveillance cameras in it. He did get caught for it. Talk about a bullet dodged. I've had some pretty crappy relationships, apparently.
I think this is quite exemplary of the downward spiral that drugs can take you in. I mean, this dude was apparently riding horses one day and then he's doing hit and runs and dumping bodies and stuff. Seriously, kids, stay away from hardcore drugs. God. I met him on one of those sites that isn't just a dating site, but is a dating site to find someone who shares your particular interests. And we seemed compatible enough to meet. I much prefer talking face-to-face, so once I see someone might be interesting, I generally set up a face-to-face date right away. We decided to meet halfway and we'd figure out where to eat once we were there. So we met in the parking lot and I got in his car and he drove us around until we found a restaurant we both liked. We sat down and immediately he started chatting. He was fairly charming about it, but it got really creepy really quick because he seemed to move the conversation onto every person I interacted with. And once he established how close I was to them, how often I saw them, texted them, talked to them, it's like he would look satisfied for a moment and then move on to the next. It's hard to really explain, but I would tell a story about me and a friend and he would ignore every part of the story and just go straight to questioning me about my friend. The only thing he seemed interested about them was how often I interacted with them. Like, for example, stuff like this. Him. Are you guys close? Me. Fairly. Him. How often do you hang out? Me. A few times a week. He nods and brings the conversation to coworkers, asking me what my boss was like. Was I always on time? And he just did that over and over. I mentioned my parents and he wants to know if I'm a good girl who goes to see them every weekend, if I talk to my mom or dad on the phone every night. I mean, he would bring it in with stories and from a teasing tone, but he did it over and over with every person I mentioned interacting with. It got creepy and I was freaking out in the back of my head and it was getting really hard not to get up and just leave. Awkwardness scares me more than getting kidnapped though, and having to call someone to give me a ride because I thought the guy was interviewing me to be his next victim just sounded nuts in an already intense situation for me. I just started lying my butt off, so I mentioned brothers. He of course asked how many. I said 5 and started going into vivid detail about how overprotective they are, how they check in on me constantly, how one is a cop, the other is a private investigator, etc. I also mentioned how my friends make me do a safety call. Either I was paranoid or it worked because he did take me back to my car and I got to drive away and never contact that guy again. I figure if the guy was casing my life out, those would be red flags for him. I'm not gonna lie, I would probably have the exact same thought process as this person. It takes even less than that for me to stop and consider whether or not my date or someone in my general vicinity is plotting my downfall at any time.
Back in my raving days in the early 2000s, before it got trendy, I got deep into e-use and subsequently became a small-time dealer. Small-time over the course of a few months rapidly became pretty big. One night after re-upping, buying more Scooby snacks to sell, I went over to my buddy's house to play Counter-Strike until the early hours of the morning. On my way home, I got pulled over. I had 2,500 green triangle Scooby snacks in my trunk. I pulled out my license and registration, laid it out on my lap before the cop came to my window and proceeded to be as polite as possible. The cop asked me why my eyes were red and asked if I smoked the ganja.
I said absolutely not. I never liked the ganja. Weird, I know. And I told him we were playing Counter-Strike for an 8-hour plus session, and that's probably why. He ran my license, which was clean, came back to my car and said, "Okay, drive safely and let me go." I left that scene bricking it. Had he looked in my trunk, I would have been arrested and looking at a distribution felony and at least 12 to 25 years. Not to mention, it would have destroyed my life. I stopped dealing and raving after that. Today, I have a lovely wife, my own home, good health, thriving business, healthy toddler, and another one on the way. Talk about bullet dodged. My life and the life of those I love would have been drastically different if it played out the other way. It should have. I am the lucky one. I lose sleep often thinking about that. Edit. Wow, thanks for all the encouraging words and upvotes. For those of you who are critical of my choice to slang E, you need to realize that my customers were all adults with free will. Some prominent doctors, lawyers, teachers, etc. The choices we all make in life, and the consequences of those choices fall on us, period. I didn't make the drugs or import them. I didn't force anyone. I've actually cut people off many times. And today's society is frankly too quick to blame everyone else but the person, ourselves. Stop that. For those saying I got a lucky pass and need to pay it forward, I totally agree. My life changed from that day on. Now, I don't have that much respect for drug dealers by any means, but I am happy that this person is keeping their nose clean now and living a decent life. I really agree with the sentiment about personal responsibility. That is an issue that I think a lot of people really don't understand anymore. You just got to think about your actions, how it will impact you, how it might follow you in the future before you do something. Go watch the Back to the Future trilogy. That's basically the core of that entire thing. How your actions, how your decisions can have a terrible outcome in the future. Well, just recently I had a job offer, which never felt right in my gut. After the initial excitement of actually getting an offer wore off, I was feeling kind of meh towards the position, but figured I could do it for a year or two since it would potentially allow for a better quality of life. However, when reading the contract, so many warning bells went off in my head. My husband works in employment and labor law, so I had him review the contract. The first words out of his mouth last night were, "Don't sign that contract as it is." Some highlights include, keep in mind I work in K-12 education, not some extremely secretive cutthroat industry, a 1-year no-compete clause for any tangentially related position in the entire county, which, keep in mind, has the largest school district. 60 days written notice if I were to leave, not crazy at first, but good luck getting a new job over the summer, which is when most schools post positions. If I decided not to return after signing a contract, I'd have to reimburse all insurance benefits starting from July 1st, 2017. Not sure if these are standard in other industries, but I've never seen anything like this as a teacher. Basically, it would make it close to impossible to leave the job, and I could potentially be screwed so many ways if I did. If this was what was in the contract, what could the work environment be like? Just sent off my thanks but no thanks email to the director with the school year quickly approaching. Looks like I'll be back at my current employer.
Read your contracts, kids. I know I don't.
No, I pay other people to read them for me. The city was doing road construction in front of our place about 3 years ago. It was annoying, noisy, and covered everything with fine dust. During this time frame, my son ended up catching some sort of bug, or so we thought, that seemed a lot worse at night. 3 nights in a row, he ended up jumping out of bed after throwing up all over the place and having diarrhea. It was awful. We would spend hours just rubbing his back and cleaning him up. I would then put him to bed in the spare bedroom and he would pass out completely exhausted. After the 3rd night, I went on a cleaning spree and was basically scouring the hell out of everything to get the sick air out of the house, when I discovered that damn dust from the road construction was coating everything with this grimy blackish residue that was incredibly hard to remove, or what I thought was road dust. I was irate enough that I took a pic and posted it on Facebook and was whinging about the construction and asking if anyone else was having the same issue. A couple hours later, I get a message from a friend that asked if we had an oil furnace. I thought it was odd, but just said that yes, we do, and asked why she asked. She then proceeded to tell me that all her ceiling fans and vents, etc. looked exactly like my pic did when her furnace filter got clogged and wasn't burning off the oil properly, which in turn filled her house with carbon monoxide. I totally went into preservation mode and packed everyone into the truck and drove around the corner to the fire station. Firemen came in their trucks with their carbon monoxide detectors, and sure as hell the basement was highly toxic and was filling the house. My son's room is directly above the furnace room, and when the heat was kicking in at night, he was getting poisoned. We are all lucky to be alive, especially my boy. Our landlord installed carbon monoxide detectors 2 days later after the house aired out and the furnace guy did his repairs. Scary stuff, kids. So I actually do laboring. I've never done road work before, but God, I can only imagine how bad the road dust is for you. But I did a lot of soft strip demolition work, really. And when I was working like 10-hour shifts a day, I would do like 50-hour weeks or something like that, just moving stuff around for these guys. Loads of people would not wear their mask when it's like we've just been breaking down walls and there's loads of construction dust everywhere. And obviously as a voice actor, I want to protect my voice and everything. But I would just know all these guys that would take like, I don't know, 12 smoke breaks a day or something, probably more, and still just be breathing in this dust because they didn't want to wear a mask. And I'm like, dude, you are ridiculous. Your lungs are going to be messed up in the future. Whew, I'm so glad that the story didn't end in tragedy, but that's why it's a bullet dodge story. I told this to my dental hygienist recently and she thought it was funny, so here you go. My friend owned this camp in the mountains. When it wasn't in season, he brought a bunch of friends up to hang out. So it's very late at night and he goes to get some people at the front entrance and leaves me and another friend alone. We decide to do the zip line over this pond. As my friend is explaining to me, you're going to feel a yank after you jump off. I just tell him, go and I'll see what you're talking about. He goes and looks awesome. Now keep in mind, it's pitch black outside, so I ready myself and jump. I feel the little hitch he was talking about, but something isn't right. As I conclude that something indeed isn't right, it feels like I get hit with a pickup truck in the back. I was falling about 25 feet without even knowing and landed perfectly on my back in about 1.5 feet of water. The rope snapped. Any other rotation would have left me severely injured or dead. My friend thought I died, but I got up and met him around the corner. My back looked like I had been shot point blank with about 50 paintballs. Other than that, I was fine. Well, that is some divine luck. Like, they didn't even realize they were falling. It was that dark. God damn, they are one lucky SOB. I was in Windhoek, Namibia doing the post-college wanderer thing. I was hitting the bars when I randomly bumped into an Australian guy I'd met a few weeks earlier in Harare, Zimbabwe. Harare is an epic crapburg, so there's nothing to do but get drunk and wait for your flight/bus out while you regret your decision to visit Harare. This Australian dude was my companion on the drinking, waiting, and regretting part, but we were going to different cities and parted ways when we left. So we randomly meet again in Windhoek and quickly decide that we need to get smashing drunk, just like 3-week-old times. Namibia is a great place to get drunk in mostly safe streets, the animus and energy of African nightlife, and relic German colonial predilection for extraordinary beer. As we're at the bar getting blasted out of our minds on 35 varieties of Namibian lagers, this gal comes up and starts flirting with me. She's smoking hot, great conversation for a couple hours, and she ends up asking if I want to come back to her place. I hadn't gotten laid in months and was 22 years old, feeling frisky as hell, but I said no. Something just didn't seem right. I tell my buddy that I'm going to call it a night and go back to my hostel. He asks if I minded if he made a go at the girl. I tell him sure, but something seems weird about her. I go back and pass out. I woke up with a screaming hangover the next day and spent the entire day in bed. I spent a couple more days in Windhoek, 10 out of 10 town by the way, highly recommend, but don't come across him again. I didn't expect to, so no big deal. I buy a ride west across the desert to Swakopmund and spend a few days hanging out there, and I run into my friend looking like a wreck. Turns out the chick took him back to her place, got him blackout drunk, took literally everything he owned except for the clothes he was wearing, and ditched him 3 miles outside the city in the desert. He tried to hitchhike his way back to the hostel but didn't know where he was and ended up on the back of a pickup truck going the wrong direction, depositing him in Swakopmund. Really glad I let my brain overrule my one-eyed monster in that situation. It doesn't happen often, but I'm glad when it does. Dodged a bullet.
Now, I won't go into detail, but as a gentleman who has taken some pretty big risks in some cases, this Australian dude is just on another level. He's either more daring or more naive than I am, because I would never go with someone that I didn't really trust in a foreign country that I didn't speak the language in, to a location that I'm unaware of or anything like that. Hell, I'm surprised that they would just go wandering like that and then just get absolutely trashed, because, man, anyone could take advantage of you, really.
People, what is your craziest, most interesting, I need a favor, no questions asked story? Can I stand here and speak to you like we know each other? A girl was leaving a wedding reception alone from a cruise boat I worked on. I was on shore as passengers were leaving, and she came up and asked me this. I told her absolutely and jumped right into the role. She gave me a big hug and said how good it was to see me. Around then, I kept a smile on my face, but asked if something was wrong. As it turned out, there was another guest at the reception making her uncomfortable. She said he hadn't done anything specific, it was just a bad feeling. But she didn't want to go pointing him out or accusing him of anything. She just wanted to see him go to his car and leave before she went out to the lot. Once that happened, we chatted another few minutes before she was on her way. I cannot deny that it is good to go with your gut feeling in situations like this. If you've watched Patch Adams, you know. Like this person said, they didn't accuse this person of anything directly or even feel like they did anything specific, but, your life is in your hands at the end of the day based on the decisions that you make. If you wanted to go about it that way, go ahead. Not me, but a family member. He was USAF with a number of people under his command and stationed in Nevada IIRC. In the middle of the night, one of his guys shows up on his porch, banging on his door as if his life depended on it. "Sir, I done messed up. I need your help to fix it. Can you come with me?" With nothing more than saying, "Son, whatever it is you need, we'll get you through it." He dons his dungarees and gets in the guy's car, and they drive off into the dead of the night. He notices they are headed out of town into the desert in the pitch black of night. He tries to get the driver to talk, and the guy just sort of breaks down. "I had an argument with my woman, so I drove her out into the desert and left her there. I done messed up. They'll boot me out for sure after this." The boss is doing his best to keep the guy calm, reassuring him he's going to come out of this okay. Outwardly, he's serene, but he's getting more and more anxious by the minute. They drove further and further into the desert, finally pulling off-road. They get out and the guy goes into his trunk, hands over a flashlight and points his boss towards where he left the girl. Boss starts calling out, hoping the girl was nearby, and turns to ask the airman for his girl's name. While turning, the beam of his flashlight hits the guy, and all the tumblers scarily clicked into place. The airman was carrying a shovel. In the heat of an argument, the airman strangled his gal to death and drove her out into the desert in a state of panic over what he'd done. So he went to the one guy he knew could help him set things to right, his boss. His boss that somehow now found himself helping to dig a shallow grave and trying to seem supportive. After all, here he was in the desert with a killer. Nobody knew where he was, and certain death awaited at the hands of this guy or those of Mother Nature if he couldn't keep a cool head. The officer was smart about it. He convinced the airman to bury her shallow so the scavengers could come and clean up. And so the job only took a few minutes. They go back to the car and he casually manages to leave the shovel stabbed upright into the roadside to mark the location. On the drive back into the city, the airman is almost euphoric, relieved. The boss keeps reassuring him all the way back into town, just waiting to get out of the danger zone that is the desert. As they pull into the city, the boss has his airman pull into an all-night drive-in diner and then pays for burgers, fries, and shakes. When the meal's almost done, he tells the kid, "You know what you've got to do, son. You know I can't do it for you." The guy kind of nods, walks over to the payphone, and calls the cops to confess. Yeah, the instant that they said, left her in the desert, I was just like, oh man, she dead. I was 17 and my father and mother traveled to the countryside for their 21st wedding anniversary. A few hours after they left, I got a call from my father saying he needed me to do something for him. The serious tone he used made me say, "Sure, absolutely," without knowing what he was about to ask. He told me to go out to the front where there would be a wrapped present on the foot of the driveway. He told me not to open it, look around to see if anybody was watching, then put it in my car and drive it to a commercial waste dumpster up the road and throw it out. I then had thoughts like, is my father a drug dealer, and has he gotten himself in trouble with some gang? I asked what the hell was going on, and he just reiterated that he needed me to do this for him without any questions or opening the gift. I did exactly as he asked. I picked up the gift, made sure nobody was watching, and threw it out into the appropriate dumpster.
I never found out exactly what was in that box and never opened it. However, shortly after, my mother became suspicious of him having an affair. After, my father denied it, but his story unraveled over time. He was found by my mother in bed with another woman. My mum, shortly after, attempted self-deletion. They then both involved myself and my brother in painful attempts of pitting us against one parent or another. I later found out the box almost certainly just contained pictures of my father banging his mistress, whom he is now married to. I don't speak to my parents much anymore and moved interstate. I'm not sure if this person is English or not based on the way they wrote mum, M-U-M, and the talk of the countryside makes me go, oh, this person's totally freaking English, but then they mention moving interstate and I'm like, oh, they're American? Or maybe they're an English person who lives in America. Pretty minor considering some of the other stories here, but I have one. During the Dark Knight Rises premiere, me and my friend were close to the front of the line. Our theater was the only showing for the next 2 hours, as the other room had broken down. The people in that line were told that if there was any room left in ours, they'd be allowed in. Slim chance to none, so we start going in, and this guy at the front of the other line looks desperate. We lock eyes, and he gives me a questioning nod. I nod back, knowing what he wants. He walks straight up to me with a big smile on his face and says, "Hey man, how have you been?" I respond immediately with, "Max, good to see ya. Glad you could make it. I'm good, you?" I have no idea if that's his name, but he looks like a Max and he rolls with it. And from there we launch into small talk and shoulder claps as he walks in with me and my friends under the suspicious eye of the usher. As soon as we're in, he veers off and tells me he owes me one. My friends patiently wait until he's out of earshot and ask me, who the heck was that? I shrugged and said, no idea. When the movie ends and we walk out, we see each other, and this time he's with a girl. He hurries over to me and says he got a date with the girl and that this is the best night ever. If I ever need anything, he's my man. Never saw him again. Max was a cool guy. I hope his date went well.
Max does indeed sound like a cool guy. He deserves to be happy.
And it was very nice of that guy to give that guy, and I guess it's kind of funny the things that can happen from a telling look or something, or just a mutual understanding in a single glance. While we were hanging out, my best friend got a call from his girlfriend. Now, she hardly let him out of her sight on any given day, so having some free time to sit around, chat, and play up some games had become a vanishingly rare commodity. But now, on this particular day, she really needed him. She didn't have a car and needed him to drive her and take her somewhere right away. He went, of course. She told him she needed to go to an interview with a college she'd applied for and had forgotten about it, and she needed a ride. My friend took his girlfriend an hour away to the college, called me to chat, and picked her up again a few hours later. It turned out later that she had him drive her to the campus, cheated on him with another guy at a place a few blocks away, and then had her boyfriend drive her home after she slept with this other dude. And that was the story of how my best friend realized he was in a failing relationship. No, wait, he stayed with her 4 more months and rented a place next door to be closer to her before she broke up with him the next day after he moved in, because my friend was in love and she wasn't. That is absolute top-tier harlot behavior. I mean, using your boyfriend as a key instrument in the process of cheating on him is downright nasty.
Been waiting for a chance to share this one. Earlier this year at around 1 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, I get a call from a friend who lives nearby. He was in a total panic, and the only words he could get out to me were, "Dude, open the gate and turn off all the outside lights. Hurry!" Half asleep, I ask him if this is some kind of prank, because you know us guys, fool with each other every now and then. He responds with, "Just effing do it." I decide to comply, still in my boxers, turning off the outside lights. Now, just to add some detail, my house is right next to a traffic circle, so I go outside to the gate to see what's going on, and to my amazement, my friend comes speeding the wrong way around the circle. Halfway into making the turn, he turns off all his lights, turns off the car, and rolls into my driveway through my gate at a serious speed, shouting out the window, "Close the goddamn gate!" About 5 seconds later, I see a police car come speeding by, sirens and lights and everything. As I look back to his car, he emerges with a victoriously smug look on his face, shirt and pants covered in vomit, steering wheel covered in vomit, and the smell of straw rum making my eyes water. He looked at me, I looked at him, he nodded, I nodded. He asked to use my shower and sleep over. 5 weeks later, he totaled his car, drunk driving, and lost his job because he couldn't get to work anymore. Been sober ever since.
And I truly believe it is honestly probably for the best that friend stay the hell off the road.
I used to work at a college and somehow was talked into becoming a sponsor of one of the local fraternities. No Greek letters attached to this frat. It was basically just a bunch of dudes who pulled their extra cash and were legit as far as the small school is concerned. After acting as an adult sponsor for about a year, hell, I was only 24 at the time, I get a late night call from one of the frat members saying, "We're screwed. There is a dude in the house with a piece and he won't leave." I'm kinda drunk and don't really want to get involved. I tell him to call the cops, but he's worried because if the cops come, we will all get expelled. He was probably right. It was a small private Christian school, so I say fine, I'll be there in 20 minutes. I walked across the apartment complex and knocked on Malcolm's door. Malcolm was a gangbanger from way back who, I can say this because I am confident in my heterosexuality, is the perfect specimen of a man. Over 6 foot, over 200 pounds and simply shredded with muscles. I tell him the problem and he says, "Cool, let's go." 10 minutes later, we walk into the party. I ask who the dude causing problems was, find out and point him out to Malcolm. Malcolm walks up to the dude and says, "You need to go." Dude looks up, sees Malcolm and says, "Yeah, man, I was just leaving." The frat took a collection the next day and paid Malcolm's rent for the next 3 months. Malcolm was a bad mother. Maybe it's because they're just good Christian boys at a small Christian school, but it's kind of lazy that they had to call a dude to get one other dude to remove another dude from their party. I don't know how many people are usually to a fraternity. Like, naturally, I don't know. I wasn't there, but the situation just seemed handleable.
A friend who I hadn't heard from in a while calls me up saying he needs $200 and he'll give me $250 by the end of the week. He has his own business and owns houses, so I'm like, yeah, sure. Sure enough, at the end of the week, I get my $250. A week later, he asks for $600 and he'll give me $700 back. Seeing as he paid me back on time the first time, I'm like, sure, why not? A week goes by, no money. 3 months go by, with me calling him once in a while, etc. No money, and he's not picking up anymore. So I go, screw it. I go to his place, call him from my girlfriend's cell phone, and he picks up and says, yeah, he's home. I go to the building he owns where he used to live. He comes over all confused. I ask him for the money. He says all he can give me is $400. This avoiding bullpucky goes on for another 2 months. I go, screw it. Go back to his place again. Says he got robbed or some bullcrap. I think he stopped the chronic and started doing the hardest stuff, to be honest. Anyways, I agree to take his spear launcher, an estimated worth of $600, as collateral for the remaining $300, and while I have not seen him in a long time, I still have the launcher.
Now, it may be debatable whether or not this transaction was actually worth it. You got 4 to 5 months of having to track and nag and follow up this dude for money, but in the end, you got a spear launcher, and cold hard cash is good, but a spear launcher is forever. Kinda silly, but I was at work one day commuting from home in a New York suburb to New York City, and my dad called me. He says, I need a favor, pick up a copy of the most recent Playboy on your way home, okay? I'll pay for it. I asked him, why? And he told me that sometimes when he asks me for things, I should just frickin' do them. Not angry, we're jokers. Turns out there was an article about someone in the wine business that he wanted to read. It was just a bonus that he could confuse the hell out of me in the process. Edit. I can't find the article online, but it was during Rudy Kurniawan's scandal. Check him out. It was apparently a big thing in the wine world, and my dad had done some work with him in the past. Though it would be hilarious if he just wanted the magazine, he did have a real excuse. Now, I don't know about the rest of you lot, but I truly believe that this man's father deceived him and simply wanted a sneaky peek at some Playboy bunnies. I live in a sketchy town with a lot of crime and homeless people. It's practically impossible to exit your apartment without seeing someone homeless. However, they're generally nice, and therefore I'm nice to them too. A few greet me when I walk by because I give them my leftovers sometimes. Well, one particular hobo and I are good friends. By friends, I mean we talked that one time when I was going home from a frat party and he told me I was eyed. Anyway, he saunters up to me one night when I was walking home and asked me to do him a favor. He wanted me to take another route home, but didn't explain why. Now, I typically don't follow instructions from the homeless in the middle of the night, but something in my gut told me to listen to him. Probably because for the first time since I've seen him, he looked sober. So I did. The next day, I heard by word of mouth that a woman was graped minus the G. I don't remember if it was also a murder or not on the route that I was going to take. That woman could have been me. I never saw Hobo Bro again after that. Now, there are 2 reasons why you may have never seen Hobo Bro again, and that's all I'm going to say on the matter.
About a year ago, my roommate asked me to squeeze her boob as hard as I can. I asked her why. She told me to just do it, so I obliged her, and she just stands there with her eyes closed for 5 seconds and then runs out of the apartment door giggling. She denies it ever happened now.
Well, I really don't know what to say, dude, except girls, women, they can be pretty weird sometimes. I thought that this was just going to lead up to her asking you to check for a cancer lump or something. When I was 14, I was spending an unproductive summer vacation day watching TV. I was alone and was somewhat annoyed to hear a desperately loud knock at my door. As I unlocked the door, my best friend at the time rushes in and nearly pushes me over in the process. He was helping his grandma and attempted to skateboard home when diarrhea struck. This guy comes into my house and absolutely destroys my bathroom. It was one of the worst experiences of my life, not to mention his life. But the guy literally didn't ask, and he didn't need to do so. Human beings should let other human beings poop with impunity, unless it's dysentery or something. Now I say, the poop with impunity is man's truest and greatest right, passed down from God himself. My friend and his wife were raging snow snorters for almost 20 years. They have both been clean for 3 years, and at this point, his prostate cancer has returned after being in remission for several years. He had heart surgery about 3 months ago. A few weeks ago, he asked me if I could do him a huge favor. I told him, of course, because he was there for me when I was completely down and out and unconditionally gave what little he had when no one else could be bothered. He said, "You don't even know what I'm going to ask you yet." I told him that whatever he needed, I'd make it happen. Turns out he and his wife just wanted a ride to Hackensack, New Jersey, so he could buy her a wedding ring. They've been married over 20 years and due to their drug habit have been repeatedly pawned and ultimately sold off their wedding rings. Now they're clean and I feel they believe he doesn't have much time left. He wants her to have her wedding ring. I drove them last week. He couldn't get his legs in the car without help. After they went in and picked out the purchased rings, he couldn't get out of the car to get lunch and pick up the rings when they were ready an hour later. It was a huge effort for him to take that ride and walk without his wheelchair. He spent all his savings on that set of rings. I took a few hours from work and we had a picnic in a park in Hackensack. It wasn't a favor or an inconvenience. I felt lucky they asked. When you're bereft of good health, it's a good thing if you have good friends to make the short time that you have as wonderful as possible.
A friend asked me to store some cooking equipment and related supplies. Bowls, pans, cooking utensils, some wine, whatnot. Turns out he'd been getting some as a kind of bonus from his boss. Except his boss's boss wasn't aware of this, and then the police got involved. Felt zero guilt. Got a nice $500 bottle of wine out of it. Then my brother's alcoholic girlfriend drank it one night. Doesn't even remember it. Just wanted more stuff to get her drunk. I will never forgive her. Edit. Since this is supposed to be a no questions asked story, I do have to admit that I did ask one question. When he said he needed me to store these things, including wine, I have a spot, but it's not refrigerated. Is that okay? To this day, he still chuckles about how that was the only part of this favor that I was concerned about. Edit 2. I know some people are probably curious as to what exactly the deal was, so here's a more detailed explanation that I got after the fact. My friend was a chef at a high-end 4-star restaurant. Now, at a place like this, they are really serious about both health codes and presentations. So the amount of equipment they went through monthly was pretty significant. Scratch a mixing bowl, chuck it. Dent in a saucepan, chuck it. Even the slightest blemish on something the customer would see, it's gone. A lot of this stuff wound up with the staff at their homes. That wasn't all of the stuff that wound up at their homes. But the point is more that it's not like this stuff wandering off was really eating into the bottom line. Or at least, that's what my friend and most of the rest of the staff thought. Now, on his own, he probably wouldn't have taken much of anything home past the odd dented, scratched dish and whatnot, but his boss openly encouraged staff to use the employee equipment discount for basic stuff and even the occasional bottle of wine when an employee really stepped up during a busy night or something else. The boss did the same himself, so nobody thought much of it. Flash forward a few months, and one night the boss is mysteriously absent. Eventually, they come to find he's down at the police station
station being interviewed on suspicion of felony theft. Everyone on staff is thinking this is a huge overreaction on some upper level person's part, an attempt to scare the staff straight and kill off the employee equipment discount bonus in one go. Then they got more details. So at the time, my friend had taken a total of 6 of those bottles of wine and thought I was probably abusing things a bit. His boss had taken whole cases of wine. My buddy had maybe 8 creme brulee dishes. The boss had a few dozen. Pick an example of something my friend thought was on the border. The boss had 5 to 20 times as much, and that was just over the last year. So long story still long, they quickly realized that the police investigation was legitimate, and they were all likely accomplices. A few people panicked and tossed all their stuff. Some, like my friend, decided to hide it until things were a bit less crazy. Importantly, nobody talked, so only the boss went down for it.
Damnable sticky-fingered gremlin boss giving me random crap and trying to take me down with him. That would suck so hard. Don't know how familiar you guys are with how underage college parties work, but when the police bust in, usually for a noise complaint, nothing happens. But my buddy was at a party at one of our more sketchy friends' houses, and the police bust in, find booger sugar, and the 3 to 4 cops start trying to process and arrest the whole party. He is luckily in the back. They haven't seen him yet, so he texts me saying to come to that house in a specific spot. Turn my lights off and text him. So I do, and I watch him leap out of a second-floor window and run into my car. And upon seeing the 2 cop cars as I drive off, I ask my first question. That being, what in the figgity yuck? He gave me a bottle of Grey Goose for my trouble. That's a pretty good friend to give you a bottle of Grey Goose for your trouble. My first question would be, where was my invitation to this party? Got a call from a friend at 4 in the morning one night declaring that he needed some help. We both lived in the same dorm at the time, and I figured he was just trying to get in without being seen by the resident assistant drunk, because we were both underage at the time. My groggy butt didn't ask any questions and went down to the side door to let him in. He wasn't there though. I looked around, called his name a couple times, smoked a cig, and went back inside because it was cold as Santa's balls outside. I tried calling him again to no avail and ended up going to his room to see if his roommate knew where he was. Turns out he was in there, naked, handcuffed to the bed with a gag around his neck that he spat out. I laughed so hard I woke the neighbors up, and then they laughed with me. We let him out and he proceeded to tell us this story of this fine woman getting all frisky on him and handcuffing him to a bed. Apparently she was on top, and right before he got lucky, she hopped off, laughed at him, and told him to figure it out when he asked how he was getting out. That's when he laid there for what he said was 3 hours trying to get his phone from his desk at the foot of the bed to his face so he could call. Felt bad for him, but never letting him live that one down. Life's a matter of perspective, and I would much rather be this dude than the guy that got stranded in a desert in the Dodged a Bullet video I recorded. I'm just gonna say that.
What's the most significant "you just messed with the wrong person" moment you've witnessed or experienced? I stopped in Reno overnight while moving across the country. Had everything I own in a little beater I bought for the trip. All night, I'm keeping an eye on the parking lot. There's a cop car in the lot. Sure enough, late that night, I see a shady guy walking slowly along the line of parked cars, scoping them out. To my surprise, he decides the cop car is the one he wants to break into. So he takes off his shirt, wraps it around his arm, and starts hitting the window with his forearm. I call the front desk and let them know what's going on. The lady says she's calling the cops. I tell her it's a cop car he's trying to break into, and ask if there's a cop staying in the hotel. She says that she'll check. About 30 seconds later, a very angry man in his boxers thunders out of his room and tackles the dude. He messed with the wrong person. Why of all the cars would he decide that the cop car was the one to break into? That just sounds like a bad plan from the start. My father recently told me a story about this jerk who he works with driving trucks for different distributors. They have no smoking areas because of food productions and things like that, but this jerk decided to smoke there anyway, putting his butts out in a styrofoam cup. Anyway, after a while, his truck was loaded, and he decided to just throw the cup out the window after getting his truck, when a man walked past and asked him calmly to pick up the cup and put it in the bin. To which this intellectual giant of a driver says, "If it's so important, why don't you put it in the bin?" before driving off. Without making much of a reaction, he picked it up, walked to the bin, then makes his way back inside. When my father gets back to the main truck depot, he sees this driver getting yelled at by his boss. Turns out there was a conference being held with some overseas members of the company and the CEO. The CEO whom was told to pick up the cup. They instantly barred the driver from the site and all associated sites, and my father's boss had to jump through hoops to not lose the contract renewal. I can't imagine the level of ecstasy that CEO would have felt during the whole situation, knowing that this prick doesn't know who he is. When I was a senior in high school, I was at some house party. There was this chick named Rachel there, a notoriously crazy girl who was known for causing trouble anywhere she went. She was also a pretty big girl, maybe 5'9" with broad shoulders. Anyway, out of nowhere, she just starts screaming at another girl, Sarah, a shorter, skinny thing, who was honestly on the other side of the room doing absolutely nothing. Rachel gets up in her face, starts cussing her out, and pushing her multiple times, obviously just trying to start something for the heck of it. Rachel finally decides to throw a punch, and I kid you not, like a flash of lightning, Sarah just launches at Rachel, starts beating the crap out of her face, knocks her on her butt, and strongholds Rachel's hair and starts slamming her skull on the brick fireplace in the house. I think she must have knocked Rachel out for a minute, because Sarah decided she was done and just stood up and walked away. Turns out Sarah's older sister was a competitive female boxer and showed her a thing or two about fighting. Lesson learned, just because they're small doesn't mean they can't beat the crap out of you. There's this old, miserable looking man with a nickel who seems to just ride the subway all day. The nickel man only seems to have one purpose in his life. He sticks out his hand with a nickel on his palm and he just points it at you. It's like he's asking for you to look at his plain old nickel. He's like a reverse panhandler. One night, I was coming home drunk and saw the nickel guy. He was doing his usual rounds and he came to me. He stuck out his hand and like usual, you just let him be. But I was tipsy and I pulled the nickel out of his hand. Within seconds, he went from normal nickel guy to crazy rip your face off yelling angry gorilla man. Once I put it back, he became normal nickel guy again. I was mortified. The nickel's obviously very important to him. He just wants to show it off. One night during my junior year of high school, some of my buddies came by and asked if I wanted to go party with them. I didn't know the person throwing the party, but I said screw it and went with them anyway. It turned out to be one of the most surreal nights of my life. We got there and only knew a handful of people out of the 50 or so people that were there. There were a lot of people from different schools, so I knew that eventually something was going to happen. Soon after, one kid, we'll call him Ron, pulls out a piece and starts bragging about how his parents bought it for him and no one should mess with him. Then he starts pointing it at people to show off the laser sight on it. The guy throwing the party, we'll call him John, saw this and told him to stop pointing it at people. Ron said something like, "Screw off, don't tell me what to do, I do what I want." It got a little heated, but then it all seemed to get worked out and Ron put it away. About 5 minutes later, Ron had the piece out again, and trying to be slick and prove he was a bad boy, pointed it right at John's back. When he did, John just happened to turn and saw Ron pointing it at him. I don't remember his exact words, but John said something to the effect of, "Oh, you want to mess with me? I'll be right back." He started jogging to the house. We were in the front yard. And I told my friends, we need to leave. This is about to get crazy. While John was jogging to the house and while he was inside, Ron seemed confident at first. But then he realized he'd gotten himself in a terrible situation and started to walk quickly to his car. John was not far behind, however, with a much bigger piece of his own. Ron got to his car and got in, but he was blocked in and couldn't move. John walked up to the car and tapped on the window. Ron cracked the window about an inch and was crying, probably begging for his life, all while John calmly talked to him. I couldn't hear what was said, but I did hear John finally say, "Stop crying, you look like a real wuss." He started to walk away, But then all of a sudden, he stopped, turned around, and fired at Ron's face from about 8 to 10 feet away. We all thought for sure that we had just witnessed a murder, and scattered like roaches when you turned the lights on. I remember looking back and seeing John calmly walking back into the house while everyone was running around him. That was what freaked me out the most. His calmness. Turns out, Ron lived, and John was charged with attempted murder and a few other things. Ron had reconstructive surgery to repair some of the damage, but he was badly disfigured. I don't remember if John was found guilty or not, but I do remember hearing that Ron won a settlement from John's family. He bought a new Cadillac and whatever else he wanted. But he was super depressed about his disfigured face and got hammered constantly. He died in a single car drunk driving accident not too long after. I'll never forget that night. That got insanely out of control. Those are not toys. You don't just wave them around. And you definitely don't use them unless it is absolutely necessary. I live in front of a hospital parking lot. Some guy in an expensive car cut in line. A lady in a van was super peeved and kept honking. He got out to calm her down. She got out, ripped off her wig, and started screaming and pointing at the cancer center entrance. He looked like he wet himself and got back in his car. Still stayed where he cut in line though. My father and his brother, who were both 6'6", were riding in my uncle's tiny little Chevette, and a guy got road rage and chased them into a parking lot. You could almost see the guy fill his pants when they unfolded themselves out of the car. My dad always tells me this story of how you should never get out of your car after a road rage incident. My mom and him were driving to the city when another driver didn't give my dad the right of way. He almost crashed into my parents, and my mom was pregnant at the time. So of course my dad was angry out of his mind. My dad, being a pretty big dude, wasn't exactly someone to mess with, but out of the little car that almost crashed into my parents, got a man that my dad described as a freaking giant. Dad quickly got back in the car and kept driving. He always gets embarrassed when he tells the story, because my mom still laughs at the face he made when that giant got out of his tiny car. Two drunk guys were bugging this local busker, trying to get him to fight them, saying all sorts of racist stuff. The busker was black. The busker just lost it. Obviously, he had to deal with a ton of drunk jerks. He picked up his guitar and hit one of the drunk guys across the face with it. I called the police when I saw it, and later got called in to give evidence against the drunk guys, who got arrested, saying that they started it. I mean, hey, you got what you asked for. I was covering a hockey game as a sports reporter when I saw the single best retaliation of my life. In my state, if you're female and you want to play hockey with the boys, you can. Typically, the serious girl hockey players will play in these leagues because the girls-only hockey leagues are kinda crap. There was this girl named Alex who I covered since she was a freshman, and she was really good. She'd played since she was a kid, was on some really good travel teams, competed in national camps, got a college scholarship for the sport, and played 4 years in college. Anyway, during her junior year, I'm covering an away game at this crappy arena, and her school is playing one of its rivals, so I know it's gonna be a chippy game. It did not disappoint. This big tough boy notices she's a girl, or had played against her before, and spends the first 2 periods basically trying to intimidate her by checking her hard into the boards whenever she has the puck, and generally doing all the things you know someone is doing to antagonize you. Now, I've seen this girl play, and I know she isn't gonna tolerate that, so I just sit and wait for the moment that she snaps. It comes in the 3rd period. The jerk comes running full speed from one side of the ice to the other and gives her one of the worst cheap shot checks I've ever seen. She hits the boards hard, lands on the ice, and the crowd yells because the refs either didn't see it or didn't care, and the play breaks the other way, so everyone else is moving away from them. She doesn't miss a beat though. Calmly, I watch her pick herself up, and the jerk hockey player must have said something to her to cause her to snap, because she takes her helmet off and goes his way. At this point, I can tell he thinks he's going to dismiss this sweet little girl and tell her to play with dolls or something, but he never gets the chance. She socks him right in the jaw and starts beating the crap out of him. It was absolutely amazing. He must have had maybe 50 pounds on her, but she didn't care and beat his butt handily. And because the refs were on the other side of the ice, it took a little bit of time to break them up. She got ejected, he got ejected, but he sulked out of the arena knowing full well he got his butt kicked by a girl. It was phenomenal. 2 kids about 11 years old were bullying this 9-year-old kid by instigating their little sister to go hit and kick him, with the threat that they would beat him up with a hockey stick if he retaliated. The poor 9-year-old pleaded with them to stop, but when they wouldn't, he charged the kid with the hockey stick, took it from him, chased them off, and threw the stick over the fence, then continued to saunter home. I witnessed this from about 50 feet away at age 13. It took place in about a minute, and while I was contemplating a way to help the kid out, he just took matters into his own hands like a G. That kid was not one to mess with. When I was about 10 or so, there was a cricket in my house that I shot with a Nerf gun from a prone position. It dodged it, then jumped at me, and I got up in a panic so fast, the gun flung from my hand into the kitchen, breaking a few glasses. I never messed with crickets again. Didn't you know? Crickets are vicious, dude. I was working in a sketchy part of Albuquerque when I realized a guy was following me through the parking lot. I started walking faster and so did he. I knew I wasn't going to get to my car before he reached me, so I took a knife out of my purse and turned around and shoved it in his face and yelled, "I'm from Wisconsin, I can gut a deer." The dude took off and I got in my car shaking. That's a really scary moment. I'm glad you were able to defend yourself and got away safely. I lost it at a Subway a while back. This story isn't about me losing it at a person myself, but I found someone who could and did. The Subway I go to is inside a skating rink, and on this day, it was flooded with newly pubescent boys thinking that treating people like absolute crap is how you act like a macho man. One girl behind the counter was near tears, and the other woman was trying to hold her own ground against a bunch of around 13-year-olds. It was stuff like, "You witch, I didn't ask for mayo. Are you blind? For crap's sake, that's not toasted enough. When I get a job, I'm gonna be making more than you." Just a taste of some of what I heard. So I went out to the lobby of the skating rink and found a woman nearby and asked her if she was with the boys in Subway, which she was, and then I told her to follow me. The look on the boys' faces when she let out her angered screech after listening to them was friggin' priceless. She made the boys pay for their own food. One boy didn't even get to finish making his sandwich, with the woman saying, "Wrap it up how it is and he'll pay for it." And from what I gathered as she practically dragged them out of there was the boys who weren't hers, she was going to speak to their parents, followed by strong protests as she told them to pack their crap, as she was taking them home early. I left the girls at Subway a nice tip and they gave me a cookie. Never mess with an angry mom. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall at that moment. That's gotta be the worst kind of jerk there is. The group of 13-year-olds who think they've just got the world figured out and that they're better than you even though they have not accomplished anything. Their kryptonite is their mother, and I love watching that moment. When I played hockey, I got kicked out of a game early, so I had to watch it from the stands. A guy from the other team was chasing one of my teammates around the ice, slashing him, trying to get him to fight. Finally, my buddy dropped his gloves and proceeded to give this dude a man-sized butt whooping. That teammate went on to become an enforcer in the NHL. We're getting a lot of hockey stories today, but I guess that is the one sport where you're technically allowed to fight the other team. After drinking and partying in the haunch outside our base in Japan, my friend and I went to the on-base taxi stand to go back to the barracks. We hail and start climbing into the first open cab we see. This drunken white guy was running for it, but we beat him to it, and we didn't even see him. Anyway, he's furious and starts yelling at us. 2 girls, 1 Latina, the other black. "You stupid friggin' N-word!" And then a group of about 6 black sailors come around the corner to the stand. I don't know how it happened. Maybe Paul Mooney summoned them. Anyway, white guy changed his mind and ends up walking/running to the ships. A fight didn't end up breaking out, but he came really close to getting his butt whooped. I work at a restaurant and 4 punks decided to dine and ditch. They ran out and got away, but luckily I overheard one of their names while they were eating. Long story short, I tracked him down on Twitter, and the direct messages went like this. Me. Haha. Nice try. We know who you are. You owe us $40. Bring the money or we're reporting you to the police and your school. You have until Sunday night. 1 minute later. I'm terribly sorry for this horrible incident. I'm bringing the money right now. I'm terribly sorry. It wasn't even my idea. I had no choice but to run also, or else I'm in trouble. We left the bag of money. 15 minutes later, after I sent the message, a guy literally opened the front door and threw a Ziploc bag full of $40 of cash and change into the restaurant and ran away. Tools. I bet they thought it was real friggin' funny at the time, too. I work in a law office and regularly have to file documents with the court. I've learned from watching one interaction not to mess with the clerks at the filing window. A lot of people probably don't know or wouldn't believe how detailed the rules are for submitting documents to the court. There are rules regarding the type of paper you can use, the exact spacing of the heading on the paper, the exact measurements of the 2-hole punches at the top of the sheet, all kinds of things. There are literally dozens of rules on how to format your filings. In my experience, these rules are rarely enforced. The clerks will reject documents if there are major errors, missing signatures, or filled out incorrectly, things like that. But will usually let things slide like your 2-hole punches not being precisely 2 3/4 inches apart. But there was one day where I saw a clerk take sweet revenge against someone who had it coming. I was standing in line waiting to file something, and a notoriously huge jerk of an attorney got called up to the window. The clerk asked him something like, "I'm really sorry, Mr. Jerk, but you're missing some attachments to this form." He reacts as if she had just stood from her chair, flipped him the bird, and went and pooped on his mom's grave. He starts yelling about how she didn't know what the heck she was doing, and that a trained monkey could do her job, that he would complain to her supervisor, and on and on and on. He goes stomping away, and she looks much calmer than you would expect for someone who just got reamed out by this enormous jerk. I get called up to her window and say something like, "I'm so sorry you had to deal with that." She replies, "It's fine, he's on my list now." I'm curious, so I ask what she means. Her response was fantastic. She says, "Mr. Jerk handles a lot of family law cases. He'll be wanting to file things here, and his paperwork is bound to land on my desk. For people like him, I get out the formatting sections of the rules of court, and I make sure he's followed every one of them." She points to my filing and says, "Your 2-hole punches look off. You see how one is higher than the other? They're supposed to be a certain distance from the top of the page. I'm not going to reject yours, but next time he drops something off at the filing box, you better believe I'm going to bust out my ruler." I let her know that I think that's awesome. But once he's seen the reason his document was rejected, he'll just have an assistant fix it or whatever. She replies, "We don't have to tell him why it was rejected specifically, just that it violated some rule of formatting. He can figure that out for himself if he ever wants to have another document filed." She looked so happy. This woman has got to be one of the most petty, evil, conniving people I've ever heard of. I want to travel the world with her.
Where do you draw the line with charity? I was in Chicago a few years ago with my husband, my daughter, and her fiancé. We went to Giordano's for pizza. Anyway, we ordered way too much food, and the pizza, when it arrived, was like 2 inches thick. We'd had so many starters that we could only eat 1 piece each of the 2 pizzas, so we got to-go boxes. As we were walking along, this woman came up and told us she was really hungry and could we help her out giving her some money. Well, we didn't have any cash on us, but we did have this still warm pizza. We offered her one of the to-go boxes, but she got all insulted and told us she didn't want our goddamn pizza. She wanted money. We told her to F off and went and found a homeless guy who was more than happy to take our pizza and thanked us profusely while enjoying a slice. Yeah, I've met homeless people who get all indignant because I offered them something besides money. I've met homeless people who I have given money and they have the audacity then to turn around and say, "Give me more." I'm also surprised this person is all like, "And the pizza was 2 inches thick." And it's like, yeah, isn't that the whole thing with Chicago pizza? It's thick.
I was in a bicycle shop getting a repair done and some lady in her 20s came up to me and asked me to buy her a bike. I am not very prosperous looking, so I cannot imagine what she was thinking. She was early 20s with a European accent. I thought she might be Dutch or Danish, but I'm not knowledgeable about those things. She looked more like a traveler than a tourist, and she just made a little small talk about the bikes and how expensive they were, and then quite seriously asked me to buy her one. She seemed used to the idea that others would take care of her. I can be very dense about it when a girl is flirting with me, but I don't think that is what was up. After she wandered off, one of the guys asked if she was bothering me and I said no, so I imagine she was creating other issues. Bloody hell, the cheek on that one! I was at work a while back at a major retailer in the Deep South. I had a gentleman come in and ask me about a laptop. The laptop cost $899. I explained the specs, gave him a lowdown on the warranty, etc. He let me wrap up my spiel and looked me dead in the eye and said, "I'll give you $400 for it." This happens a lot, so I patiently informed him that this was impossible for me to do and I do not designate prices. He looked at me and said, "Well, you just lost yourself a computer sale," and left. I wish it ended there. I got off and was walking to my car, and as I got there, a truck comes flying into the parking lot, and it's the same gentleman as before. He whips into the parking spot next to mine and gets out. My metaphorical hackles were raised because this guy was driving so aggressively. He gets out and slams his door and walks over to me. He looks at me and says, "You'll sell that laptop to me for $300 or I'm going to get you fired for racism." I answered him and just said, "Sir, I have no idea what you are and I have no intention of selling you anything at all. I'm not even on the clock. If you have an issue, go into the store and ask for a manager." He swore explosively that his intimidation factor didn't work and went into the store. I drove home and forgot about it. I get to work the next day and find out he was arrested for trying to steal the shelf display. Feels good, man. I never want to work in retail and have to deal with some goddamn psychopath trying to get me to bring down prices that I have no right to. I found a wallet with $200 and several gift cards in it while I was at work one day. It was a Yu-Gi-Oh wallet, so I figured some kid lost his B-Day money. I turned it into the service desk and forgot about it. 30 days later, no one had claimed it, so I got to keep it. I was telling my friend about my good luck, and a friend of hers, not a friend of mine, says, "You should give me $20. I asked her why. "'Cause I never punched you in the face for all those times you were a female dog to me. It should be noted that I have always been kind to this extremely unpleasant girl, even when she was squatting in my living room for several weeks. Well, goddamn, I guess it's just an unpleasant fact that some hoes be like that. Life moves on. Congratulations on your brand new Yu-Gi-Oh wallet, son. I gave this guy a free hot dog and he took it and threw it on the ground and said he wouldn't be a part of my system. He told me that he didn't need my charity because he was an adult. The man made his choice. He refuted the hot dog of charity and now he will suffer for it with an empty tummy. I've helped out a mother trying to buy a pizza dinner for her 3 kids. They looked really hungry and the mom was short maybe $10. She was frantically looking around in her purse and pockets trying to come up with the cash. I gave her a 20 and told her to buy some breadsticks and sodas too. Her look of gratitude is something I'll never forget. On the other hand, I was once in some clothing store with my girlfriend. I don't remember which one. They all kind of blend together in my mind. When a teenage girl walked up to me and demanded $10 so she could buy some lipstick. I refused, so she ran to her mother, who basically chewed me out for refusing her precious baby. So basically, I won't give any charity to entitled buttholes. First of all, yes, my friend, that is the way to go. And second of all, who the hell are these entitled people who just walk up, demand money, and then their parents are just as entitled and expect you to buy things for their child? If someone genuinely needs help, I'm willing to give it. If they think I should be obligated to give them my time and money because of arbitrary reason I don't necessarily agree with, they can go suck a bag of ducks. They didn't actually say ducks. I remember about 10 years ago I had just moved to a new city for college and I was definitely a starving student. I had a budget of $40 a week for food and transportation and that was it. Anyway, one evening I'm walking from class to the bus stop and I see a kid sitting in an alcove begging passers-by for money. A few things. He had a nice bike, new shoes, I had neither, and expensive sunglasses. So he sees me and asks if I can spare some change. Feeling charitable, I reach into my wallet and I see that I have $22. 2 singles and 20. I take out the 2 singles and pass them to him and he says,
"Oh, you aren't giving me the 20? At which point I took the 2 singles back, stuck them in my wallet, pocketed it, and walked off while this moochy butthole says something akin to, "Come on, that's not cool. Can I please have the $2? Beggars can't be choosers has never felt more appropriate. See, that's a good example of where, you draw the line. But a lot of the stories I'm seeing here, and probably not reading because, the topic at hand in the video title and stuff, it's about where you draw the line, But loads of people here are just trying to virtue signal, it seems. One time there was a kid at McDonald's who was lost and couldn't find his mother at a food court in a mall, so it wasn't like middle of the city. He was really hungry and asked me for some food, so I bought him some of the cheaper items because I'm a pretty poor teenager. After I bought him some food, he started yelling at me because I bought him cheap food. He said his mom would have brought him a Big Mac. At that point, I took his food and brought the child to the mall security and let his mom get him some food after she recovered him. The angel and devil sitting on his shoulder.
Abandon the child. He is a lost cause.
Do not blame the child. It is the parents' fault that they are such a spoiled little B-word. I was checking out of a Walgreens and a man with a lot of what looked like skin cancer approached the register. He asked the manager if he was a veteran. The manager was, so he asked to speak privately with him. I couldn't hear much, but he was asking for money. Manager turns him down as I am walking out of the store. Man tracks me down on my way to the car and gives me a sob story about being a war veteran with skin cancer and he needs money to go to the VA. I asked him for proof that he was a veteran and he didn't have any, of course. So I said I could not help him. After pressing me for money aggressively, he started cursing me and rolled his eyes and walked away. I posted this on Reddit a while ago and an actual veteran advised me that they carry some special form on them at all times. He said it's more important than a birth certificate to them. I can't believe a guy that had the audacity to cuss me out when he's the one impersonating a veteran for money. See, that is the thing. It is why I am frankly so skeptical about helping a lot of people because many people in the world have actually forgone their moral fiber and integrity in turn for making money. And they don't care about you, they don't care about anyone else, they just want money. Just for the skin cancer alone, I probably would have given them change or whatever to take the bus wherever they need to get to. My boyfriend worked at a gas station for a few years. Apparently, nothing hardens your heart to charity cases quite like it. I was with him once when a man was trying to bum money, then offered to sell us clothes from his car, all about the size for tween-age kids, and then started yelling at us. Meanwhile, there are about 15 other people he could have harassed there. If you didn't expect to run out of gas, why do you have clothes to sell that aren't boxed or even look remotely like you run a shop? I have a little bit more respect for someone who's actively trying to offload some bullcrap on me or sell me something in exchange for money. Even if they offer me something that I genuinely have little to no value in whatsoever and don't want, I still respect it a little more than someone just being like, "Hey, you, give me some money." At a gas station off the interstate, this guy came up to me and asked for gas money. I gave him $5. He walked straight over to his late model Cadillac and drove off. Several layers of WTF later, I no longer give strangers money for gas. Okay, here's the thing. If they actually straight up walked off with my $5 and then just drove off, I'd be annoyed. If they filled up their car, that's whatever, because I don't really consider cars to be a status of wealth anymore. Because in some cases, what that should tell you is that this person is kind of stupid and bad with their money because they decided to go with a really nice expensive car that is actually outside of their means. Because here's the thing, once you buy a car, your hand is pretty much on your wallet at all times to make sure that you can keep it maintained. Which is personally why I choose to bicycle everywhere like Kentaro Oe, the golden boy. If you know what I'm talking about, you're a legend. I was eating with my family at an outdoor restaurant in Vancouver. We got the bread, water, and appetizers, and then a homeless guy walked up and without asking, took the bread off our table, ate some, and then walked away. Dude, if you had asked, we would have given it to you. Something about the idea of someone stealing my food makes me angrier than stealing my money, and I probably would have kicked off right there and then. I'll pay for a bus fare for someone. A few times people have been short of change, and one time this guy was incredibly hungover, had somehow got to Swindon from London, and his friends had buggered off. I figured a bus fare was a bit of kindness to someone feeling rough, and he was so thankful to get to a town and to some tourist information and a cash point. However, if you're homeless and you sit next to an ATM and stare at me like I'm the devil, you get nothing. Whilst I might have more money than you at the moment, I am in fact a student and I do need that £5 for food, okay? I think that's absolutely fair. Just because you have less than me doesn't mean you're entitled to my things or my money or whatever, and it doesn't mean that I'm obligated to give you anything. Charity's only charity after all if you do it of your own volition. On Oxford Street in London, there's this one homeless dude who sits next to the ATM. He always asks me for change. I don't get it. I obviously don't have change. That's why I'm at the ATM.
What does he think I'm going to give him? A 20? I wouldn't mind if he didn't kiss his teeth and spit whenever I politely apologize. Passive-aggressive stuff like that just gets under my goddamn skin. Where does charity end and entitlement begin? When we start, continue to enable these people by not helping them out of their own situation. Simply giving someone money does not solve the problem. It merely delays it. Give a man a fish and he will eat for a day. Teach a man to fish and he will eat for life. This is a very good proverb which should be thought of when restructuring our forever flawed welfare system. Simply throwing money at people and keeping them content does nothing for our society in the long run. Sure, you can feel good about yourself because you advocated for this, but ultimately, you're only making it worse. We need to implement employment programs, skills and training, education, goals that need to be met in order to continue to receive government assistance. If you're going to get this check, you need to maintain a score of X on these following things. We will help you along the way, but in the meantime, there needs to be a give and take. If you don't have a job, you can still work for money you are getting. This raises self-esteem, makes the person feel better about themselves, etc. There is no initiative with our current system. It is broken. I'm going to be serious about this a minute because this is a pretty divisive topic when you get down to it on a national level like this, talking about the welfare state, which I'm just going to make it very clear. I highly value the welfare state, but I also believe in equivalent exchange and that you should work for what you get.
I used to love shopping at 3 or 4 a.m. when I lived in Austin. My favorite store was the Heb at Brody and WM. Cannon. It was huge and empty except for the stalkers and a cashier. Loved it. And then I actually had someone try to scam me. Had he asked for a little cash, that would have been one thing, but when he acted like he knew me from a mutual job, I got the creeps. I verified for myself that I had no frickin' idea who this guy was by naming off a place I'd never worked from a time when I lived in Houston, and he ate it up, acting excited at our reunion, then giving me a sob story about his kids being unemployed and that they had no money for food. So I said I didn't have cash. He said that was fine, that I could just buy groceries with my card. I decided to give him a semi-true sob story of my own about how sick my retired cop husband had been and that I barely had enough for our groceries and had to borrow from my parents to buy his prescription. I think I managed a tear or two. I said it was just great to see him. We exchanged goodbyes and I made a beeline for the checkout and made them rouse the manager from the office. It thrilled me to no end to discover that they knew about this man and his scam. He'd been told he wasn't allowed in the store, but they just didn't have the manpower to watch the entrance every night. I went on with my shopping, bought my stuff, made them get the manager again and made him walk me to my car. And that was the end of my love affair with 3 a.m. grocery shopping. I too once loved going to a shop real early in the morning, but sadly that place was so wrought with crime at that time that they decided to shut at regular times. This will probably get buried, but here it is. As a rule, me, my husband, his brother, we all give money to people on the streets. My husband and I never have lots of money, but it is what it is. My brother-in-law, on the other hand, is truly awful with money and hates having it, so he generally will give $10 or a $20 bill to whoever asks for it at the right time. Well, fast forward a week after he gave some homeless dude about $5 to $10 on his way home from work, he and my husband are walking around downtown and this homeless guy starts to call out to him. He kinda just waves him off because he's in a bad mood and has no money, and just doesn't want to be bothered. The homeless dude comes running up to him yelling, "Hey man, wait!" So he finally just stops and goes, "What?" And the homeless guy goes, "Here man, you helped me out last week and I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't forget you," and proceeds to hand my brother-in-law $10. At this point, he and my husband are both just like, WTF, and my brother-in-law goes to give it back to the guy saying, "Nah man, you'll need it again, don't worry about me," and the homeless guy was absolutely adamant that he'd take the money. So rad and so bizarre. Finally, a story that meets the criteria of the topic at hand while also showing the what goes around comes around benefit to karma and charity. I've said it before, but some of these are just people virtue signaling and not actually saying anything about the topic. Coincidentally, my dad just told me this story. He was grabbing a quick lunch at McDonald's and some guy asked him for cash to buy food. Dad only had his card on him, so he bought this dude a huge meal instead. A few weeks later, the same guy hits him up for cash at the gas station. My dad doesn't have anything, and he says no with an apology, but the dude freaks out and starts screaming, "You Mexicans are so cheap! Screw you! Go back to your country!" etc. My dad calmly replies, "I remember you. I brought you a meal a few weeks ago, and because of your attitude, I will never, ever help you again, you ungrateful female dog. I mean, yeah, no matter who you are, if someone's immediate response is to be racist to you after you've just said, no, I will not give you my hard-earned money, then yeah, you can say whatever the hell you want to them as far as I'm concerned. With charity, it depends mostly on who asks and why. I'm a fairly nice guy. I like helping out and such. On Sunday, a coworker told me his sister had cancer and was collecting donations. I gave him a $20 bill to help out. Downtown, you can tell who's just in it for the money. They get like $2 tops. I'll admit, when I went to LA recently, I didn't see a single homeless person that I wasn't like, oh, damn, you need this more than me. Except for maybe the one really talkative guy who was all like, hey, you know, the royal family are evil, right? I'm telling you this because you're English, you know? I was once visiting a girl I used to date at a local Walmart when I noticed that this middle-aged pregnant woman was struggling with her groceries. Like a gentleman, I offered to carry them to her car for her, which she agreed. When we reached her car, she asked for my number. As it turned out, we went to the neighboring universities. Now, here's where things get a little shady. I get a call from an unknown number nearly 4 months later. Turns out it was the same lady asking if I could lend her Microsoft Word and a bunch of other software. I told her I couldn't because I didn't have it myself and recommended some free alternatives. I thought this was the last I would hear from her until a month later, I get yet again another call. It was her again. This time she informed me her baby was just born. I congratulated her. She then proceeded to ask me to do her graphic design homework for her. I politely declined and blocked her number. Some people like to leech off of kindness, know where to draw the line. I respect the fact that this lady's going to university while being pregnant and then obviously having to look after their baby, but it's not this person's problem to do your homework for you, especially when they're doing their own course and homework that they need to get done too. I once got yelled at for not giving a homeless woman money. She was spitting, she was angry, I was leaving the bank, so it's not out of line that she thought I would have money, but when she asked if I could spare some change and I said, sorry, I don't have any to spare, she freaked. I stopped, looked at her and said, I have 15 grand in student loans, a mortgage and a dog. I don't have money to spare for someone who can't help themselves. She sat there slack-jawed and shuffled off, and I walked away feeling like a butt. You're not a bad person if you're simply trying to look after yourself and live within your means, okay? Plus, this lady sounds like she specifically placed herself in that area to ask people for money so that it'd be awkward when they maybe said no. So I was a student in the north of England and pretty poor. It's winter and I've just walked my friend to the city train station at the end of a visit. This guy approaches me with a story about how he's lost his bank card, his parents were supposed to pick him up, but their car has broken down and he's totally stranded in the city. He sells it to me. He really sells it to me, which is just as well because he needs like £40 to take the train. He even offers to leave me his laptop as collateral until he can pay me back. Now, I don't want this guy's laptop, but I don't want to lose a week's worth of food/expenses. So I come up with what seems to me a reasonable suggestion. I offer to give him the money if he'll let me hold the laptop battery. It was a big clip-on affair, probably worth about £40 to £50 for a replacement, so it seemed a reasonable compromise. He flipped and told me to go F myself, and that's more or less what I did. I'm going to remember that potentially for the future, because I'm guessing the laptop itself is probably like got nothing on it. It's a shell, a hollow decoy, and the battery, like he's just going to take that home and then put it into the actual laptop he likes to use. A bum I always see around my city came up and asked me for some cash for the bus. I've often seen her around and she always asks, and I usually give her my change or $1 or $2. I tell her I only have a few bucks but would give her some. She asks to see the money and I take out all I had, which was about $3 and change. She leans in and looks it over and asks, "Is that all?" I say it is, then she tells me she needs more. $2 can get you a bus ride anywhere here. I tell her again it's all I have. She gives me a dirty look, says she doesn't need my money, and goes off to ask the next person for cash. I use the term bum because, as it was explained to me, there seems to be some sort of hierarchy for the homeless. Hobos are like migrant workers, think Steinbeck. Tramps are transients who keep to themselves and fend for themselves. Bums are the douches who just want money and are usually butts. Don't need to be homeless or poor to be a bum. I guess the last part kinda holds true. You don't really need to be homeless or anything to be a bum. You know, here in England, it's a pretty normal thing to say to someone. It's like, you're bumming off your mother. You're bumming off the government, you scav. I do find the whole talk about, like, the hierarchy kind of funny. Like, I'm just imagining at the very top, tippy top, there's like a king hobo on Trash Mountain.
What's the quickest you've noped out of a job? It was a shop that refurbished train suspension hydraulics. 40% of the guys were missing at least part of a finger. Maintenance guy was missing 4 on one hand and 1.5 on the other. Half the guys were intoxicated, and the guy training me stormed out halfway through the second day. I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna dip now. I'm sure your fingers really appreciate that decision. Many years ago, I worked at a popular sports bar as a line cook. First day, they had me train with a guy who didn't speak English for 2 hours. Not a huge deal. Mostly you observe people in a kitchen and that's how you learn. The owner came back and said she was scheduling me to be alone the next day, which was Super Bowl Sunday. I noped out of there so fast. I left right then and there. I'm willing to bet the person who left that position before you left for the exact same reason. I worked for a newspaper for most of a week. I was expected to use my own laptop and software. No IT, and I'd have to share logins and passwords with 3 other people and guess when they would need them. For me, it was 1 week. It was 1985 and a collections agency was looking for an IT guy. It was basically desktop support on some IBM PCs. It took me a week to realize what a soul-deadening place that was, and I bolted. It was mutual, actually. They saw how I was reacting to some of the techniques the collectors used. The targets were mostly old people who were encouraged to sell family heirlooms and the like to pay off debts. 3 days after my 2-week training, I was supposed to be a seasonal temp worker for a national propane company. The job distribution and training consisted of taking calls off hours for people who wanted refills and acting as a messenger service, referring their contact info to their local store when they opened the next day. Easy peasy. When I got out onto the floor, I found out I was actually expected to be a dispatcher for drivers, and also the first point of contact for all emergency situations. Things I had never been so much as briefed on in training. My first shift, I had to field a call from a local police officer who was on site to a horrific propane truck crash. I got to wake the guy's district manager in the dead of night, tell him his worker was deceased, and the overturned truck was blocking a few lines of the freeway, and the police were trying to get a hold of him. That was just the start. One customer got the smell of garlic and eggs in their house, and I got the call. "What do I do, Mr. Dispatcher?" "How would I know? Get out of the house ASAP?" Another customer, "The CO detector is going off." I got the call, instead of 911 for some reason. I had zero interest in being an underpaid, not trained emergency dispatcher. It's the only job I took off on without giving a 2-week notice. I was nice enough to finish out my shift on the 3rd day, but that was it. Honestly, you were way too lenient on these guys. That's a serious position to be just dropping you in without the appropriate training. I would have gone a step further and reported them to the proper authorities. Someone needs to be properly trained in that position. You're handling emergencies. You can't afford to just be any old Joe. I went into an office for an interview. They said they had several positions available and I wanted to do some admin stuff. Well, after the interview, they told me to get into a van to do the next part of the process. Turns out we were driving an hour away so I could shadow one of their door-to-door salespeople. They would ask residents to go into their basement to check their hot water heaters to see if they were eligible to replace them with their company's own. I felt pretty uncomfortable about this, and pretty peeved that my whole day was gone doing this. The worst part was the girl I was shadowing spent half the day sitting around in the truck reading magazines, and just waiting for people to come home from work. I was sort of asking questions about the job, and she got defensive and said, "Well, I decide if you get this job or not." To which I replied, "Yeah, I don't know if I want to do this." But she kept insisting that it was her who decided if I worked. I don't think she understood that I meant I don't want to do this crap, period. What a waste of a day. Yeah, a lot of companies like this have really sketchy hiring processes, where you think you're applying for one job and then you get dragged out to something like this. I'm sure a lot of people just get an Uber and go home at that point. Found out that the educational assistance they touted in their advertisement applied only to full-time employees, and that they both defined full-time as no fewer than 40 hours and kept anyone that would apply for that assistance from ever being qualified for it. None of this was advertised, and the people I interviewed with assured me, a college student, that working 21 hours a week would get me benefits. Too bad I read my contract before signing it and called them out. Don't lie to your employees, especially during an interview on something that can be easily and swiftly disproven. If you're willing to lie to me about this, what else are you willing to lie to me about? Mine had to be when I was 18 and working at Blockbuster. I was helping the manager during the before open shift, getting new items stocked on the shelves that came in that morning. My mom called me and told me that my dad was having a heart attack, and she was panicking while waiting for the ambulance. Why did she call me at work to tell me this? The Blockbuster I worked at was in a strip mall type area behind my cul-de-sac. My house and the Blockbuster was separated by a small alley and a 3-minute walk. I told my manager what was happening and asked if I could leave to help my mom while they waited for the ambulance. She said no. I just stood there looking at her, thinking she couldn't be serious. I would be gone for all of 10 minutes and back helping her if needed. She stressed how important it was to get things done that needed to be done, and I could only leave if I called around to the other workers and found someone to come in and cover for me while I was gone. I took off my name tag, slammed it on the counter, and walked out. I never went back for any reason. For any who might wonder, my dad came out fine and was in the hospital for a few days. I was interviewing for a contract position at a very small game development company, and they told me that they were looking for someone to help finish up an existing project. Literally, the game looked like it was made in MS Paint, as if they had just hired some random guy off the street and asked them to make some art for them. Granted, it's a mobile game and sold for the standard 99 cents, so maybe that's not the worst. But the game itself doesn't look engaging at all either. But I figure, worst comes to worst, I could make some money on the side with some low effort. Then they told me that my pay would be a percentage of the sales. Noped right out of that one. I was pretty well qualified, but between jobs and receiving financial support, I get an interview with a small company. I'm looking forward to earning some money again. The boss/interviewer is a huge jerk. At one point, he asks me if I feel guilty that people like him are supporting me. I politely inform him that he'll have to support me a bit longer while I find a suitable job. I tell him that the interview is over, but thanks for your time. I went for a trial shift with a door-to-door sales company. The guy I was partnered up with told me that if he didn't make above the target sales, he was coming out with the equivalent of £3 per hour, which in the UK is well below minimum wage. This was a commission-only, self-employed role. Noped all the way home that day. Here's another example, guys. Just avoid that door-to-door stuff. It's never good for you as the worker. I worked in a bakery. It was my first day, so I get there in the morning to meet everyone. Then they have me grease up the baking trays for the others to fill. I lift up the first tray and like 10 to 15 cockroaches just scatter everywhere from under the tray. I tell the guy showing me the work that there were cockroaches, and he just shrugged. This was all in the back store. Customers were 10 feet away. So I tell the guy I'm not feeling too well after about an hour of doing that, and I head to the bathroom. When I come out, I told him I couldn't do that job, and he told me to get a real job then. So I left and got myself a proper job. I hope you called the health inspector too, 'cause that's just gross. I had an interview at what I thought was a regular steakhouse in a new town I had just moved to. The interview went well. It was just before the restaurant opened, so it was pretty empty. At the end, a waitress starting her shift walked by in buttless chaps and a thong. Turns out that was their uniform. The manager called like 30 minutes later saying I got the job. I had to politely decline that one. Back in college, I used to work part-time as a nanny. One summer, I landed a really sweet-sounding 40-hour-a-week Monday to Friday nannying job, looking after a baby and toddler. I was super excited about all the money I was going to make working that many hours. But the weird thing about this job was that the unemployed dad was also going to be at home with me. He was supposed to be spending all his time looking for a job, and I was watching after the kids while the wife was at work. Literally that first week, on day 2 or 3, he starts hinting about his marriage problems and how his wife sleeps on the couch. The next day, he asks me to try out his fancy new massage chair. I reluctantly agreed, and he just stared at me while I laid on this vibrating chair and was like, "Oh yeah, nice. Great, thanks." He then offered to give me an actual massage sometime, and maybe I wouldn't mind giving him one too. On Friday afternoon, I went home, told my parents who I was living with for the summer everything. And my mom called the guy and told him I wasn't coming back the following Monday, or ever. He then sent me a text message saying he was disappointed in me. Ugh, and his poor wife. This guy just sounds like a total creep. You definitely dodged a bullet on this one. It was my first day working for a family business that had just bought the equipment necessary to install underground fiber optic lines. They had previously been realtors, but had read an article in an entrepreneur's magazine that said $1 million a year gross was common. They pulled their 14 and 17-year-olds out of school to act as laborers, and the mom and dad were going to run separate crews. I was their first employee hire. As I was setting up my bore path, the mom told me we didn't need to expose an electrical line. We would just drill a few feet underneath it, and we didn't need to expose it. I told her that was ridiculous, reckless, and dangerous. The husband then came over and wanted to fight me for insulting his wife. And not 30 seconds into his tirade, the 14 and 17-year-old drilled directly into a large electrical line, which pops the transformer and sounds like an explosion. As I was walking away, the father went from wanting to fight me to chasing his 17-year-old around with a retention pond. The mom was begging me not to leave. Nope. I was unemployed for a couple months and started applying for pretty much any job I could do. This one was a basic small biz IT support contractor. The employee the interviewer introduced to me mouthed "run" when he turned his back. That was enough for me. Shout out to the employee though for giving you the warning. For me, it's when I was cold calling people about injury claims. Have you been injured in the past 3 years? That kind of thing. The thing that really irked me was that all of the people I called in those 20 minutes were polite, said they're not interested, and they were just sitting down for dinner. I quickly realized it was a horrible job, and I was in no way cut out for it. I left after 20 minutes and just walked out the door without a word. I went to my orientation at a boot factory. They're government contracted and so pay minimum wage. So I figured I'd work there a while and look for something better. After we do the usual paperwork signing and such, we're taken as a group onto the factory floor for a tour. It's hot, it's crowded, it stinks, and everyone working looks annoyed by our presence. Okay, I guess not everyone loves their job, right? No biggie. I'm sure this won't be so bad. Then our guide informs us in no uncertain terms that our coworkers quite often give new people bad information to get them in trouble or to make them mess up. They'd even be the ones to rat you out. Then we were told our foreman is the type to yell for no reason, ask people if they're drunk in an accusatory way for no reason, and is generally a giant jerk. I took a few moments to think after these last revelations and said, nah, and walked out of the building without a word to anyone. Screw that, Captain. I'm not putting up with all that for $8 and some change an hour. I work as a nanny, but when I first got into childcare, I was just babysitting. So it was my first night babysitting for this one family. Things went well, changed some diapers, put the baby to sleep, and that was about it. The parents come home and are very drunk. They asked me to stay for a little while after they got back, which was weird. Then they offered me, a 16-year-old at the time, a drink. Feeling a little pressured, I took it and just sipped on it. Then the mom got really close to me and says I probably shouldn't be driving home after having a drink. Once again, feeling a little pressured, I was thinking about accepting. So I asked if I'd just be sleeping on the couch. I'll never forget her next words to me. She says, "Oh no, honey, you'll be going to bed with us." I noped out of there so fast. I think I ran to my car, but it was just kind of a panicked blur. I left my purse there and everything. Second day at Rue 21, and the managers plus other coworkers all went out to lunch together and left me alone in the store. I wasn't able to ring anybody up yet, and the store was packed. I just walked out. When I was 16, I had an interview at a local pizza place in a not so good part of town. I was hired, and as I was walking out, 2 guys came in and robbed the place. The manager gave them the money in the register and they ran out. I looked at him and he said, "You get used to it." I never went back. Yeah, I don't blame you either. If it's that frequent of an occurrence, it's definitely not a safe place to be spending a lot of your time. I had a job in a salad plant, those bags of salad mix a lot of restaurants use. I was there for 2 weeks coring lettuce. In front of a conveyor belt, 8 hours a day, pick up a head, slam it, pull the core, put it down, next. You talk to your coworkers or you plot the downfall of Western civilization. One really sweet lady had been there for 10 years. 10 years on the lettuce line. She got called into the office and was gone for about a half an hour. She said, "I won't be here tomorrow, I got promoted." I asked what she'd be doing. Cabbage! I didn't quit. I wished her well, dropped my stuff, and walked out. I feel bad about not quitting, but I was young. And, well, 10 years. That was 28 years ago. Had I stayed, I might be up to carrots by now. I sometimes wonder how my life would have been different had I stayed. And in those moments, I celebrate every decision I've ever made. I was hired as an intern manager for a local nonprofit recycling plant. This meant I would hire and train interns for this amazing work opportunity. Turns out for them, interns meant working for free, doing basically everything for the organization event and marketing-wise, while also cleaning the bathroom and taking out the trash for the whole place every week. That's actually super illegal for being way too close to slave labor. I was on contract for minimum 6 months, but I managed to get out of it after 2. I ain't risking my career for their shady business practices. I wanted something part-time when I was at uni. I applied for a position at the local cinema chain and got an interview. It was one of those high turnover places that meant if you got an interview, there was a 95% chance you got a job. The guy at the box office radioed to his manager and was told to take me to room 7. We got to room 7 and wait. And wait, and wait. About 25 minutes pass before the manager starts screaming abuse over the radio because we're not in room 2. So off to room 2 we go on the other side of the building. It's a 15-screen cinema. The manager starts trying to turn on the charm, and I basically say if that's how you treat your employees in front of a job candidate, there's no way I'm ever working for you, and ask the other guy to show me out. I'm sure it made no difference to his behavior, but it saved me a lot of potential abuse. I worked at Claire's for 1 day. At the end of the shift, she asked me to put a bucket load of tiny earring packages back on the walls. A few hours later, I finish, and apparently misplaced a few of them. So she threw all of them on the floor and said to do it again. Nope. Sounds like she just has some kind of power trip. That was completely unnecessary. It was listed as a marketing position. The guy doing the interview started showing me and the other candidate how sharp Cutco knives are. Turns out it was a pyramid scheme. The guy kept asking if I wanted to sign on to buy some knives to sell. The other candidate went to the bathroom and never returned. I felt really awkward, also needed to wait to be picked up, so I stayed for the whole thing. I once saw a Craigslist ad for a stereo salesman. I showed up to a warehouse where a bunch of dudes got into a minivan. The owner told me to go on a run and see how it is, and then talk about the job. Turns out all these guys did was lie and con. They would go up to strangers and say, "Hey man, my cousin's got this stereo, but he got arrested and I don't need it. It's worth $500, but I'll gladly sell it for $200. Then use pushy tactics to get people to go to the ATM and give them money. The system was a piece of crap off-brand, and I overheard the owner saying in bulk it only cost him $20 to buy. Yeah, I noped out of this pretty quickly. I also called the police. JCPenney. I came to work to set up shelves and things, store technician, but my boss handed me a mop and said someone lady pooped in an aisle when she didn't get her way. I handed the mop back and said I'm not hazmat certified, but he is, and noped out of there. My first day on a carpentry job when I was 22, a 20-year-old kid shot me with a nail gun from about 20 feet away. He thought it was hilarious, and so did everyone else, including the company owner. I noped right out of there. Yeah, no kidding. And I hope you called the police, cause that could have been a very serious injury.
What is the most overrated video game of all time? At this point, Pokemon. Ever since it got to 3D, it's gone downhill in terms of gameplay quality. I'm not going to argue about Pokemon designs because my issue is how they never got their Super Mario Odyssey or Breath of the Wild. Even the Mega Evolutions are fine, but they keep adding and changing gimmick mechanics to the point it feels like Yu-Gi-Oh!, where every entry has to add their own mechanic, and it makes the overarching game a cluster of rules and modifiers. They milk nostalgia so hard like Sword and Shield. So many Gigamax evolutions, special versions of Dynamax, one on new Pokemon, but most were Gen 1 Pokemon. No other company do I see so shielded from their lack of quality and innovation. We even had a taste of an improved gameplay formula in Arceus and us researching Pokemon. We use It's a Kids game as an excuse to make crap when kids deserve good, if not better games than us, cause they don't have the knowledge to know it's crap. I gotta wholeheartedly agree with this. Not the part about Pokemon being generally crap, just that I do think Pokemon as a franchise is shielded far too much for what people get. I mean, it's one of the most goddamn successful franchises in the entire world, and the games are fine, but that's just it. They're fine. I think Scarlet and Violet did look crap, though. Like, for me personally, X and Y was the last Pokemon game that I actually bought, and then I borrowed Sword or Shield, I can't remember which one, and it was fine, but I really do expect better from one of the most successful franchises in the entire world. Probably the most successful franchise in the world. I'm gonna stick my neck out and say The Last of Us is a cool story to experience once, but as a video game, it's not some 10 out of 10 mind-blowing experience, and people got way too fanatical about it. I personally really enjoyed The Last of Us. I played through it multiple times. I even did a run where I refused to use guns where the game did not force me to. It's a solid game, but it's also one of those games that basically went, oh, a man can only be interesting and deep and philosophical and sad and vulnerable if he has a child around. Like, you know what put me off 2018 God of War? When, oh, Kratos has a son now, and now he's an interesting character. Kratos was already interesting, you cowards. There were already several segments in multiple games that showed the depth of his anguish at the loss of his family and his vulnerability, which he channels through unyielding violence. Far Cry. The first 3 were ahead of the game, but everything since is just copy and pasted. You mean like everything else that Ubisoft make? Oh, I went there. I actually don't really play Far Cry. I've only played Far Cry Primal on the Wii. I actually have Far Cry 2 on my Steam library because it was like £2 or something like that. So maybe I'll give that a go because like this guy said, I've heard the original Far Cries are freaking amazing. But yeah, Ubisoft as a company, I feel like their newer Far Cry games, friggin' Assassin's Creed, they all just kind of blend together in my eyes. I don't really care about them anymore. I used to love Assassin's Creed, and Rayman Origins freaking rock. Like, Ubisoft used to be a good company. Overwatch, it's just a shooter, man. It doesn't deserve the worship that it got, and it consistently underdelivers. People assume it has such a deep lore and world, but it really is a bare bone of a basic concept done to death. I don't take this comment that seriously. I'm not an Overwatch guy. I used to be when it first came out. I played it for ages with friends all the time, but I'm pretty sure the die-hard fans of Overwatch are few and far between at this point, and it is far from an overrated game at this stage. Feel free to tell me if I'm wrong, though. Might be a controversial take, but The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. I love it and hate it at the same time. I love the potential, but hate the execution. I love the lore around it, but hate how the game shows barely any of it. I love the world, but hate how empty it is. I love the characters, if they had any character at all. I love and hate it with a passion. I never actually finished The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, but, I think it's a case with open-world games where it's very easy to lose steam in them. It was just okay, in my opinion. Not like, it was pretty groundbreaking, I guess, for 2011. God, that's old now. But personally, I was like just getting super into Monster Hunter at that stage in my life. World of Warcraft. The lengths people will go through to try and keep that game playable is astounding. Combat just feels so clunky and repetitive. Okay, so I love Final Fantasy XIV, but I really don't think like combat is like the biggest thing in World of Warcraft. What I like about World of Warcraft is the world and exploring that world. That is dope as hell, exploring Azeroth.
I'm gonna catch some crap for this, but BioShock. It never caught flack for being derivative of System Shock, even to the point of being named in an obvious homage to it. Probably because relatively few people actually played System Shock at that point. But if they had, they might have wished BioShock was more derivative of it. Because while BioShock dresses itself with the language of immersive Sims, it completely failed to deliver on its initial promise of an open-level, play-it-your-way experience. BioShock is a game where you can sneak, but you can't beat the game by sneaking. You can hack, but you can't beat the game by hacking. Open combat is an inevitability. Similarly, the levels are big and open, but it always has a very clear idea of where you're supposed to go next and how you'll get there. I suppose it's appropriate in an ironic way that BioShock only ever gives you the illusion of choice. Speaking of which, the narrative is overall pretty mediocre, aside from the admittedly well-executed twist everyone talks about. Many of the areas, the only reason you're there is that it was between you and your objective, and that it's kind of the tone. It also mostly fails to integrate its political themes. Rapture's liberation vision failed because everyone got a substance that gave them superpowers but made them insane, not because the original vision was ghastly. Similarly, the communist opposition to it failed because the leader was secretly corrupt from the start. The game never really offers an opinion on whether either idea could work or why they would fail. It just kind of plays in the space for a bit before something else makes the question irrelevant. Yeah, I kind of get where they're coming from. I still enjoy BioShock. I haven't played it for a while, but if you really want a game that's really open in the way that you can approach the entirety of it and win in like very specific ways, then play Dishonored. That is an amazing game. That's the game that I will talk about, and people are probably going to turn around and go, oh, that's so overrated though. No. It's a perfect game, actually.
Zelda Breath of the Wild. I am a Zelda fan. I really love the series. I tried my best to get into this game and I wanted to love it, but I just could not as I found it very boring.
Fair enough if they feel that way. Personally, I thought that Breath of the Wild is probably one of the single greatest open world experiences in any video game ever. If anything, I'm having more trouble playing Tears of the Kingdom recently. I just cannot get into that game right now. Maybe it's because I'm just so busy and stuff, or I don't know, maybe it's because it feels a bit too similar to the original game with a lot of added mechanics. Sure, but whatever.
Listen, it's still good, but in no universe should Ocarina of Time win a best game of all time competition. And yet,
I think I disagree with that. I actually think the design philosophy in Ocarina of Time is super good. Z-targeting is still used to this day in many games, although obviously it's not called Z-targeting anymore, it's just lock-on. Like, I don't know, I feel like you could probably take a lot of third-person action games and be like, oh yeah, this kind of originated from Ocarina of Time in this way, you know? I mean, for God's sake, Dark Souls, Elden Ring and all that, it's basically just Ocarina of Time, really, when you get down to gameplay, but it's all polished and smooth and amazing. So personally, I gotta disagree with that. I think Ocarina of Time frickin' rocks, actually. And I ain't even talking from a place of nostalgia. I played that game for the first time all the way through on the 3DS.
Controversial opinion, the Dark Souls franchise. I think most of its difficulty is artificially created by clunky controls and a deliberate vagueness about how to tackle enemies. The people who love this game will say these are exactly the things that make it so great and I just need to get good scrub. Opinions differ and that's fine, but for me it feels like a disingenuous way to make things more difficult.
I couldn't disagree with this person more. In my opinion, Dark Souls and Bloodborne, Elden Ring, and Dark Souls 3, but not Dark Souls 2, use a lot of context and logic in the way that they do level design and enemy placement. Easy example, Sen's Fortress. If you run straight in there, you will notice that the first thing that happens is you activate a trap. This establishes a tone and establishes what you need to look out for and the kind of things that this place has up its sleeves. And if you don't adapt to stop and analyze the area for danger and whatnot, where you can and where you feel safe to, then you're gonna be fine. But if you just rough rod right in there, then you're gonna die. I frickin' love Dark Souls. I can't wait for Armored Core, but I feel bad for the OG fans because Armored Core is not Dark Souls.
Black and White, Molyneux's magnum opus, was just a glorified Tamagotchi.
Never played Black and White 1, but I did love Black and White 2 as a kid.
Red Dead Redemption 2, because it's just not fun to play, which, for me, is what a video game should be, Dutch.
I'm actually playing through this game for the first time recently, and it's not that it's not fun, but it's certainly a bit annoying when the game, forces me to beat a guy because I need to catch tuberculosis or, the 2-hour intro and stuff. Still a good game, but I agree, it is definitely overrated.
Honestly, Final Fantasy VII is extremely overrated. The story isn't that interesting, and the majority of other elements remain the same from previous entries. In my opinion, it only became so popular because it was the first disc-based Final Fantasy game and launched on the PS1 during its amazing sales point. Just about everyone had a PS1. Most of the ads for FF7 were promoting multiple discs, CG cutscenes, advanced graphics, and so on. FF7 released at the right time and at the right place, but it is by far one of the weaker entries.
Oh, I shouldn't have chosen this topic. I want to talk about these things so much. But I disagree. I think the original Final Fantasy VII is actually really freaking special. If we're talking about the remake, I don't think it's crap by any means, but I really don't like the changes they made to the remake. I'll leave it there because I've got a job to do, but god damn it, does it pain me not to talk about this in more detail.
The Call of Duty franchise. Literally the same game every single time.
I may have said it earlier, but I don't like military shooters, unless they have, like, I don't know, a gimmick to them like Titanfall 2 or something. But I actually don't think every Call of Duty game is exactly the same. If you go back far enough and then go to where we are now, there have been major changes to the game. Maybe now, more recently, the games are probably being more and more similar, but, like, I don't even see them get released as frequently as they used to be.
Death Stranding.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure upon release, the game actually did not sell that well, at least not in Hideo Kojima's eyes. I heard he had a bit of a fit that people didn't really get the game and that he's an auteur and he's ahead of his time, which I like Hideo Kojima, but I think Hideo Kojima, overall, kind of overrated, actually. Especially since he's been, like, you know, rubbing elbows with, like, Hollywood actors and directors and stuff and just shoving them haphazardly into his video games.
As much as it pains me to say it, I think Minecraft is pretty overrated. Perhaps not the most of all time, but nonetheless so. I have quite a few friends who absolutely refuse to play anything other than Minecraft, just because they are so convinced that it is the best video game of all time, and all others are trash. I definitely don't agree with that, but that isn't the only reason I think it is overrated. Honestly, Minecraft has lost a lot of its charm over the years. The gameplay is simple and not extremely engaging. The only reason I use it today is for creative builds. Also, it was never and still isn't worth $30 goddamn.
I actually haven't played Minecraft since it initially came out. My brother got, like, the beta for it.
The Binding of Isaac. Meh. It alright.
The Binding of Isaac is super good. I love the way that items pile onto each other to make cool mixtures, but I actually prefer one of the creators' earlier games called Gish. Hogwarts Legacy. Yeah, I think that major attempt at boycotting that game just ended up having the reverse effect that people wanted.
Red Dead Redemption 2. I have never played a game that someone went to such effort to build a massive, well-engineered and detailed wilderness, only to fill it with so little that it brought me nearly to tears with boredom. But so many people rave about this game, and I will never understand it.
Like I said, I've been playing it recently, and I do think it's a good game, but I think this is just the problem with massive open-world games. There is very little that they can do to fill these worlds in a satisfying way that isn't better done than a small, concentrated world where you can absolutely stuff it to the brim with good, solid content. That can then feed into level design, theming for the area, etc. I'm not going to go into this anymore.
Shadow of the Colossus. Apart from visuals, the game was a chore to play.
You know, I actually prefer Eco a little more than Shadow of the Colossus, but Shadow of the Colossus to me is more like an experience. Like, there's no other game like it.
God of War Ragnarok. I'm sorry, but it just didn't do it for me. Completely underwhelming. Felt more like a mountain climbing simulator than anything. And Kratos literally only kills one frickin' god the entire gameplay. WTF. I get he's changing in a different person, but really, the ghost of Sparta needs help to fight Odin's old female dog butt. And sure, he beats Thor the second fight, but he forgives Thor and doesn't want to hurt him, despite Thor trying to kill his son earlier. Instead of God of War, I got God of holding hands and licking buttholes.
A little bit extreme at the end there, but no, I get where he's coming from. I still stand by that. People try to say that these new games have more depth than the original ones, but I think it's just people didn't really pay attention to the old games.
I have no idea if this was considered good, and I've never played a Kojima game, but Death Stranding. I have never experienced a piece of media so far up its own butt. Like 6 minutes of gameplay in the first 2 hours of the game. The biggest challenge in that time was walking in a straight line, utterly confusing menus, the wild swings between characters staring at nothing and explaining nothing, and ham-fisted exposition, a riveting chase scene except the land is shrouded in fog and the monsters are invisible, a soulless world with like 5 people in it, 2 of which have dead or die in their name, who constantly introduce themselves like they aren't the only people we've ever met, and freedom of camera movement during the interminable cutscenes. If you're going to just make a movie, at least give us cinematography. I swear I only played as long as I did because I couldn't believe the game would continue to be so bad. I'm convinced it's End of Evangelion the game, a double middle finger to his fans who will buy anything of his, so he made a pile of nonsense to watch their mental gymnastics explain why the game is secretly genius. The only reason I might be bringing up some games twice is because people are actually explaining why they didn't like it, and I've never played this game, and that's all I really have to say about it. I played every Borderlands game from start to finish and I hated them. I kept assuming they would suddenly get better and I would understand why people loved them. Nope. I admittedly find the writing of Borderlands 3, which was the latest one that I played recently, abysmal, but I think the games have merits. The shooting's fun, the random gun loot is cool, and yeah, they're okay. Hollow Knight. I get it, Metroidvanias aren't for everyone, it's easy to get lost in it, even with the map to some degree, but god damn it, may the power of Christ compel you! Gears of War, Monster Hunter, Final Fantasy. I don't get why these IPs are so popular. Popularize the third-person cover-based shooter, tracking monsters, fighting monsters, building new weapons to fight more monsters out of the monsters that you previously thought is awesome. One of the first video game IPs to tell an engaging and ambitious narrative. First-person shooters. It doesn't matter what the name is, it's all the goddamn same thing, repackaged over and over and over again. Clearly you don't play enough first-person shooters because they do in fact vary wildly. I absolutely love Hunt Showdown because it's a lot more methodical and slow-paced. I don't feel like I can just die the instant I get ambushed a lot of the time because the guns aren't automatic and whatnot. That's just one example of a first-person shooter I like though. Heavy Rain. I know people crap on it now, but it did very well when it first came out. Same with Beyond Two Souls and Detroit Become Human. David Cage is a funny one. I've not played a single one of his games. I can see that he tries to push the envelope a little bit in his own way, but I kind of put him in the same category as Telltale games, where they're games that I will simply watch someone else play. Cuphead. I never understood the appeal of it. To me, it's just a 2D platformer with quick mechanics and old-fashioned animation style and difficult bosses. I don't think it's a bad game, by the way. I've been playing that with my girlfriend lately, and she's so much better than me at it. She's absolutely carrying the team. But I don't know, I think that Cuphead is sort of an instant classic just based on the amount of time and effort that went into it. Like, if you look at the original trailer, it looks so bare bones compared to what it became. Horizon Zero Dawn. I was excited to play this game when it first came out, and honestly I found it tedious and a bit basic and bland. I'd have preferred it to be a linear game as opposed to open world because there isn't enough in the world for it to be that enjoyable. I think that's just it in the end. Open world games are overrated. We need to return to smaller, more directed and concentrated areas in games where, like I said earlier, you can concentrate on theming, you can base level design and missions around it. But most of all, I think it's a big part that people do not like about open world games. You can make traversal of the world more engaging. Any battle royale. It was cool at first, then the novelty of it wore off years ago. It is literally a running simulator, and the design of the mode itself promotes people to play like absolute rats and hide in buildings the whole entire frickin' match. Absolute dog crap, trash piece of crap genre that I can't wait to see die so I can wee on its grave. Not sure if I go that far about my feelings of the genre, but I thought it was cool when they made a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Battle Royale game, and then I looked at it and it looked kind of crap. Dare I say, Assassin's Creed is a walking simulator with occasional action and stealth tactics. Yeah, I dropped off Assassin's Creed after Brotherhood, admittedly, mostly because I wanted to play the multiplayer, which I still think is actually a really cool multiplayer mode. Ghost of Tsushima. Game was okay, but it was overhyped in my opinion.
I actually think Ghost of Tsushima got absolutely robbed for Game of the Year in 2020. Like, Hades was good, but it was in early access for freaking ages. Like, I know it was the official time where it was finished and everything, but I don't think it even deserved to be there because it was in early access for so long. Honestly, I kind of think the only reason The Last of Us 2 actually won Game of the Year in 2020 is because it met all the ESG regulations. PT. Whenever there is talk about horror games, lots of people talk about it as if it is the pinnacle of horror games. Hell, it was a demo of an eventually shelved product.
Yo, I don't care what you say. That game was scary as a mother. I literally dropped my control screaming into my full English dinner while playing it with a friend. But it was also quite maddening to figure out how to proceed in that game. In my opinion, probably GoldenEye. I was playing PC games at the time. Quake, Team Fortress was already out, and my expectations were built up by people who hadn't played an FPS before. Same type of thing happened when Halo released on Xbox, and people acted like it was the first game with LAN play. Had trouble deciding between GoldenEye and Halo, but I at least had some fun with Halo games. GoldenEye always felt like a clumsy attempt to me. I have never had a good time playing GoldenEye, so I agree. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Linked in the description below.